How's it going, everybody? This is the Tim Pool Show. Today, we're going to be talking about the partisan divide in the United States, particularly in the media, what it means to be left, right, or center. And I've had a lot of conversations about this, where we are going. I think in the context of what's going to be happening in the future with the Democrats, the Republicans, whether the socialists, as their ascendant, do they take over? Will MAGA become the dominant Republican Party faction, which it seems to be the case? Looking at the past, I think, is particularly interesting as well, so we can see how we got here and then try and figure out, of course, where we're going. So joining me today is Julie Mastrine of AllSides.com. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm the Director of Communications and Bias Ratings at AllSides. I've been doing this work for 8 years, and AllSides is a website where we provide balanced news and media bias ratings. So we have Americans and expert panels that rate the bias of media outlets.
The way I look at it is, I was recently asked in an interview how people can try and figure out what's true and what's really going on, and you can't, right? This is my attitude. So I said go to allsides.com, not because you're guaranteed to get the truth, but that you will see one story, and then you guys on the front page, for instance, will have a big story, and it'll say, here's from the left, here's from the center, here's from the right. And at least you're getting a more balanced view of what is, but even then, it's hard to figure out what is true. So right off the bat, we have the conversation of media bias, left, center, and right. And I guess the question is for everybody, the liberals are gonna deny it, the conservatives are gonna assert it's true, but is the establishment corporate press biased to the left?
Generally, yes. Yeah. And I can say that not from a place of like me being the authority on that, but our process actually shows what the average view of Americans is. And, there's some nuance there. Like, so basically we send out news content in blind bias surveys. So we strip it of branding. And then we ask Americans to rate the news content for what they think the bias is. So they don't know that they're rating CNN or the New York Times or anything like that. They just are telling us what they think the bias is, right? So that's one of our processes. And then the other is an expert panel review where we have people that are trained to see media bias. So we have a guide on our website, 16 types of media bias. So these panelists, they're all from the left, center, and right. All of our processes are people from the left, center, and right. And they're trained to look for media bias. So yeah, what it comes down to is the legacy, what we would call the legacy press. On average, Americans and experts tend to rate them lean left. There's a little bit of nuance there. Like, we often find that people on the left will rate, the New York Times, like maybe more center or something like that. But we're like taking this sort of like aggregate view, right? So, yeah.
You said there were 16
types of media bias that we've identified, that we've been able to define.
Can you list them off the top of your head?
Oh my gosh, I could name a lot of them.
Right, I know. It's like not trying to put you on the spot.
No, there's like some that are the most common is like spin. And I can go through and define these if you want, but spin, slant, sensationalism, bias by omission, bias by viewpoint, subjective qualifying adjectives.
I love that one.
That's a great one.
Subjective qualifying adjectives.
Yeah, we saw that a ton whenever like Trump's first term. It was always like Trump made a baseless claim.
Right.
He made a baseless claim, and I was like,
comma without evidence, comma.
Yeah, and I'm like, you can't tell me it's a baseless claim. If someone makes a claim, they think it has basis. Anyway,
I'm gonna jump in and just point out. I'm gonna rag on NewsGuard. I don't know if you're familiar with NewsGuard.
Yeah.
But so I was a big fan initially. For those that aren't familiar, NewsGuard would provide a trust rating for various news websites. And I said, not that I think they're unbiased, but I will for timcast.com, our website, be trustworthy. And you know what they did? They rated us as untrustworthy. I take that back. They gave us like a C+, and it was because we reported on what Trump said at a rally. Trump spoke at a rally. He had a quote. So we did a very simple write-up saying Donald Trump at rally says thing. And then we said, appearing at a rally, Trump came out and spoke. He said this quote. Critics said X, Y, and Z. They said, why didn't you say Trump lied? So they actually reached out to us and said, Trump was lying. Why didn't you call him a liar? I said, we're not running a fact check. We're just telling people Trump had a rally, and this is what he was telling people. And they said, well, you're pushing fake news because you didn't say that Trump was lying. I'm like, it's not a fact. This is the bias they force on us.
Well, yeah, and a couple of things there. So with NewsGuard, like I dug into their rating on Fox News, and most of the, reasoning that they cited was stuff that Tucker Carlson had said. This was like back when Tucker was with Fox. And so I was like, well, you're not really telling us that Fox News reporters are doing anything egregious here. You're just saying that like you disagree with opinions that Tucker Carlson has, and therefore Fox is not trustworthy. And we don't do accuracy scores. Our ratings are analyzing perspective. Like we're telling you what perspective the news is coming from, and really so we have like a 5 category scale: left, center, lean right, and right. And really what we're trying to measure here is like to what degree the media outlet is straying from objective, neutral fact. Like the sort of traditional standards of journalism where the journalist is not inserting their own perspective and they're just telling you what happened and they're giving you a balanced view. They're telling you both sides so that you can decide for yourself. Because like you were talking about people not knowing what's true, we don't want people to be manipulated, and that's what's happening. The news is so spun and slanted that people are manipulated. So
this is where I suppose the debate comes in. I think that the left tends to be incorrect, the right tends to be correct, and those are tendencies, not absolutes. So what'll end up happening is I'll get into a conversation with someone from a liberal perspective, and they will be wrong. And when you correct them, they will tell you that you're lying, you're right-wing, or otherwise. So I can use exactly what you're saying right now. When you say that the legacy media is biased to the left, I'm sure you've seen it. Liberals say you're right-wing, you're lying, you're fabricating this, or
we get it from both sides, which I think means we're doing a good job. We get people on the left calling us right wing, and we get people on the right calling us left all the time. And I've been at AllSides for 8 years, and it's been that way the whole time. So we piss everybody off, which I think is a good sign. But yeah, we're not telling you who's right and wrong, because the thing is and I want to know more about what you think when you say, that the left is wrong. Do you mean they get the facts wrong?
Yes.
Or are they, okay, well, so a lot of these news outlets, it's a little more nuanced and complicated than that, because they might have a lot of the facts right, but they're filtering it through their perspective and through their bias in a way that leads the reader to a certain conclusion. That's what we're measuring.
I think legacy media and left-leaning outlets have a tendency towards intentional deception. So I'll clarify, because it's not absolute, and this is where it gets challenging trying to sort through what is true and what is not.
Yeah.
Because obviously I do have my own personal bias. Everybody does. But I would say the New York Times leans left, in my opinion. I don't know what your rating is, but
It leans left.
I think they have a tendency towards giving you the facts, but they also often, in some of their articles, and I don't think a majority of the time, include biased language, what you described as the subjective adjectives and things of this nature. And so, for instance, there was one story I was covering today where they claimed the amount of migrants entering Spain was 1,500, despite the fact that we know it's 49 to 50,000. They were choosing to go with an earlier number on an updated story. And that could be an error. So I recognize that. But an example would be, I had, when I got COVID, I rejected ivermectin the whole time. So ivermectin, of course, very big on the right. And I said on my show every day, no. I even went on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I said, I don't think it works. And I'm not coming at this from not liking Trump or liking Trump or anything like that. I looked at the studies, I looked at the arguments made by Joe and many others, and I said, it's like 50-50. It's hard to draw conclusions, so I'm gonna go neutral on this one and say, I don't think so, I'm not sure. The Daily Beast wrote an article calling me the ivermectin poster boy. And what ends up happening is this story gets picked up by other mainstream or legacy news outlets referring to me as an advocate for ivermectin. That's a lie. And so what happens is I'll sit down with a liberal and they'll say, Tim Pool, you advocated for ivermectin. And I'll say, not once. In fact, I argued against it. So this is what I mean. And that's me personally. When I talk to liberals, they tend to be wrong on core and key issues. And when you try to offer up a correction, you are now right wing. And so ultimately the point I bring to it, and how this conversation actually comes to be, is the truth will make you center right. If you don't want to argue about what is true and you only want to argue which political faction we see somebody from, then people who tend towards being accurate in the news and correct will be labeled right-wing. Not necessarily far right or right, but lean right at least. And I don't think this is the challenge with trying to figure out what is in our country.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to say that you're wrong, that like falsehoods get spread, and we do sometimes write about exactly what you just said, where something's like completely misreported or misrepresented. Like another example during the COVID era was Trump was giving this like press conference or something, and he said, the media reported that he said we should like drink bleach or inject bleach. Do you remember that story?
Yep, never did.
Yeah, and if you watch the full clip, he said something about that, but in context, it was like a very different. If you watch the full clip, you were like, well, that's not exactly what he was saying. He was kind of like talking offhand and like throwing things out.
He asked a question because they were using disinfectants on surfaces and they were using UV light on surfaces. And Trump asked, is there some kind of disinfectant or light that you could put in the body? And the funny thing is, there is. And Trump supporters immediately started blasting out this video of there's a device that they insert into the esophagus, which emits UV light to kill a lot of the viral load inside your body. Now, that being said, I think Trump was kind of a silly question to ask.
And he maybe should have known like how that was going to be reported on, but all the headlines were Trump saying we should inject bleach, right? That was all the headlines. So we had to write about like, okay, what did he actually say? Here's the full clip. But that just goes back to all these types of bias that we're always analyzing, right? Like in that case, it would have been, maybe slant, where like the reporter like plays up one piece of information and plays down something else. So in that case, like just taking a short clip of what he said instead of giving you the full clip would have been that was a good example of slant. But then you aren't wrong to say that like that leads to people to believe falsehoods.
Right.
And so the bias is consequential for sure. And we're working to catch that too. Like we want to write about these things where people like believe things that aren't true because the media slanted it so badly. Right.
The challenge that I have, and maybe we're kicking off the political element of this a little early, but right, my politics, if I take the political compass test or even the moral foundations test, Jonathan Haidt's research, I'm left libertarian, and conservatives don't believe that exists. Libertarians don't believe that, but it does exist. And I always describe the left libertarian as like a hippie on a farm saying like, me and my friends are going to share stuff, leave us alone. I don't know that it works in scale, but so if I were to actually vote for a politician who represented my views, they tend not to be Republican. But the Democratic Party does not have any candidates that I believe have a factual basis to their claims at this point, which is to say, sounds particularly biased. But you take a look at one of the most prominent Democrats right now, and I'm not trying to put you in it, so feel free to ignore the political stuff. But I'll just say this: like James Tallarico was very COVID lockdown mandate, vaccine mandate, clearly on the left. His positions are clearly not conservative, and he is like the preeminent Democrat right now. It was just for Texas, but he's being praised. And you have Ossoff. These people espouse a political view based on things that are incorrect. So I'm not going to vote for someone who is espousing things that to such a degree. For Trump, certainly he says things that are incorrect and often lies. But the policies are what I'm interested in, not whether someone's a liar. I mean, all politicians, in my opinion, are lying. So the issue then for me becomes when someone is defined as left or right, but their worldview, moral foundations, and policy desires are in the inverse. You enter this weird space trying to define what left and right is. For instance, Jimmy Dore is called far right, despite being a socialist and espousing for socialist policies. And then I'm considered right-leaning, even when I criticize Trump or advocate for, progressive taxes or pro-choice policies. I don't know that, to the average person, they understand what left and right means at this point. I think left and right just kind of means what moral foundation you have. Well,
I mean, we'd agree that left and right can mean what moral foundation you have. I mean, but going back to like the early days of AllSides, because this project has really evolved. So like, when we first implemented these bias ratings, what we're trying to, like I said earlier, what we're trying to measure is like how far away is the news media straying from just giving you objective, neutral fact and making sure that the journalist isn't inserting their perspective in how they're reporting, right? But then like throughout my time at AllSides in the last 8 years, the media landscape has really changed. Now we have influencers, we have podcasters, we have, it's really been kind of like democratized. And so what a lot of people, so then we started trying to sort of apply this left to right scale to that type of content. And where it gets tricky is like, you're definitely reporting the news, but you're also injecting your perspective. Like you're giving facts, but then you're also giving your perspective, right? So when we rate you, and we rated you center for a really long time, then the landscape changed. That's a whole other
Right.
issue too. A lot of people that were on the left and then on the right, like myself included. And but what these ratings were doing has kind of shifted. And, we're still trying to basically provide a rating that is an entry point to just start to understand like what perspective this media outlet is coming from, whether they're overt about it or not. A lot of the right-wing media outlets are like, yeah, we're conservative. But on the left, and especially the legacy media, they're like, oh, we're doing journalism, we're doing objective, But I just want to say one thing also is that like the bias ratings themselves, like, so we're not necessarily saying like Tim Pool is a conservative. We're saying that when you look at your news, what types of bias do you see and how is your perspective coming through how you're reporting the news? And I could see an argument. We've been dealing with these conversations internally where we're like, what even is left and right anymore?
Right.
We struggle with the Bulwark, the Lincoln Project, right? Because, because like some people on staff are like, oh, the Bulwark is anti-Trump, but that doesn't mean they're on the left. And then other people are like, no, that they are aligning with the left, their policy prescriptions. So if you look at our pages on our website describing these ratings, they're complicated.
Yeah.
But I want to say that the bias ratings aren't the end in themselves. Like we want to do a really good job with that. Like we are constantly in conversation on our team and with everyday Americans, like trying to work out what the best rating is, but we never call them accurate. We're not like, yeah, we're right. Because the bias rating is made up of a ton of nuance and people disagreeing. It's kind of like an aggregate. But really the bias ratings are a means to an end. Like we're using these ratings to provide balanced news and to give people a broad view and to help them to parse out for themselves what's true and false and to decide for themselves what they think about things. So yeah, we want feedback on our ratings. If people don't think you're lean right, like they can vote on our site. They can sign up to help us rate bias. We want to hear from you. Like, we're not like, yeah, we get it right all the time. And I see that nuance too of like some of your views actually like, filtering to the left.
The funny thing is I actually did a big debate with a bunch of progressives recently. Okay. And they're calling me far right. They're calling me a white supremacist. If I go to any conservative event, I'm a liberal.
Right.
So I would actually make this is sort of where the conversation emerges. In the context of tribalism, I have no problem with people saying that I'm on the right. However, I would argue that from a political standpoint, if we're talking about policy, we're talking about what is, then I would say easily centrist, particularly the show like Timcast IRL and what we aim for. However, what I found on AllSides, and I want to make sure I clarify this before I say anything that sounds negative. I'm a huge fan, and I advocate that people check it out because it is one of the best ways to figure out what you're consuming. But I will say this. Story selection was a reason why you said that I was leaning right. But the story selection that I have overlaps with moderates. And so on our show, we've got, Ian, who is relatively, I would call him independent, weird. We don't really know what his politics are. Routinely critical of Trump. Luke Rudkowski was was a co-host on the show for several years, who also is very anti-Trump. The story selection we go for is typically what the big news is. So, for instance, yesterday I didn't host, but I should say, as of the recording of this video, we're filming this on Friday. The story was the invasion into Ceuta, Spain, which I think it is a moderate stance to call an invasion. When you have 50,000 people storm through the borders in violation of their laws, we're not talking about immigrants coming in. I think there's a clear way to describe that. If that story selection results in a bias, then we're not talking about, I don't know what we're talking about at that point.
Well, I think the last time we did a formal review of you was like right before the 2024 election, right? And so we were looking at like what you were covering. It was like transgender issues, the culture war stuff like that, Lake and Riley. I think there were a couple of things that our panelists pointed out that the stories that you were focusing on were stories we were hearing much more from the right. And so I'll say this, like story choice bias is something that we look at, that we tend to lean on for our ratings, especially when the news is coming with commentary. Like, even if we recently looked at the Washington Post editorial board, which recently underwent a big shift, and Bezos was like, it's all about free markets now, right? So we looked at that. So their story choices, that was another weird one. We were like, are they center or lean right? Because we had all of the conservatives and centrists on staff saying they were center, and then the people on the left were like, that's all lean right. So again, it's all kind of, we're very clear that a lot of this is really subjective and like relative to your own bias. So like when you said what was happening in Spain is an invasion, like I would personally personally agree with you, but I'm certain that lefties that are helping with these bias ratings, they'd be like, that's a right wing term.
And therein lies the big challenge.
Yeah.
Because how else do you find an invasion? 50,000 people. 50,000 people storming through the borders of a country. And in the videos, you can see running full speed on boats, jumping fences, tearing barricades down. It's not like, even with the southern border of the United States, when Texas and the federal government under Biden were at odds with each other, the Biden administration deployed a forklift to raise up the concertina wire to allow people to enter. Even that, you're like, the right's calling it an invasion. But at the same time, the federal government opened the border to them. Well, what's happening in Ceuta, Spain is markedly different. And I think that this is one of the challenges. So I'm not trying to argue or debate you. Like, you can call me whatever you want. But the challenge that I have is the story of immigration was the second most pressing issue for Americans in the 2024 cycle. The transgenderism was also relatively high on the list, though I wouldn't call it, one or two. But the Trump campaign ad I'm sorry, I don't believe it was Trump campaign. I think it was a super PAC. Kamala is for they, them, was so powerful. It shifted, according to Democratic PACs, super PACs, tracking it. It shifted the vote from Democrat to Republican by 2.7 points. And GLAAD said that while they didn't find any effect on the election, it reduced favorability for trans rights by 3 to 4%. So this is where it gets challenging. If we're focused on what the biggest stories are, and it happens to be immigration, transgender issues, Bud Light, for instance, I would argue that the left ignoring that is putting themselves into an outlier camp. And if moderates, independents, and conservatives are talking about something, that doesn't inherently make it conservative or right-leaning.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And we get called right-leaning by people that say the same thing. Like, we've had discussions about our story choices and like, are we covering enough things that are of interest to the left? And it's true. Sometimes the big stories are big stories because there's polarization around it, right? Which necessarily means that the right is talking about it too. So that's a challenge that we've had too. And like I said, like these ratings are always in flux. Like we're always looking at these outlets. Like the AP is a good example. We had them as center for years. They were kind of the gold standard of objective journalism, like way back when. But then they started leaning left. And then when Trump was elected, I think it was actually really in 2024. So the second time, they went full left, and we had them in the left category, and people were like really confused by that, and they didn't. So like, we're not just looking at story choices though. We're looking at like how it's reported. Right. Like, is there even like sensationalism, which is a weird type of bias because it doesn't necessarily have to be left or right, but it is a way to like present news that like inflames emotions, heightens things. So we're looking at like all of this together, and it's, it is tricky, but we think that like we have a really good process that's trustworthy because we're having Americans say what they think, and then we also have an expert panel. Like, we're trying to kind of like, we have like our quote unquote like elite opinion, but we also have the like populist angle where we're like asking Americans to tell us, how are you perceiving the news? This
is where it gets interesting because you mentioned the changing landscape. So if you were to drop me as I am right now in 2005, I would be as far left as you could be in American politics. Pro-gay marriage, right? Coming out in 2005 and saying like, no, I think it's okay that, a man and a man or a woman and a woman, I respect that. Even Barack Obama campaigned against it, saying he was for civil unions. He did not like the idea of gay marriage. So by simply doing nothing over a long enough period of time, you just become right-wing. It's funny because they have that saying, if you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not conservative when you're old, you have no head. Yeah. But actually what's happened in this country is that the younger generations continually just start pulling further and further left for a variety of reasons. And I would, even if you look at 2016 Vox.com, which is a very left outlet, called Trump a moderate when he was running. He was the moderate candidate. Now he's being called far right. Clearly, that's not correct. I mean, I don't understand how this,
Yeah, I mean, and again, like our big thing is that it's like bias is in the eye of the beholder, right? Because this happens all the time with our ratings, where like people on the left are saying that outlet's leaning right, and then people on the right and in the center are like it's in the center or whatever. But sometimes the left and the center agree, right? And so, yeah, I don't know, but like free speech is another issue that I think to your point of the landscape changing, like, you know, 15 years ago, we heard about free speech all the time from the left, right? But then as like the woke culture rose, then we started hearing about free speech all the time from the right because their ideas were being canceled. So like, is caring about free speech liberal or is it conservative? Or is that like contextual to who's most interested in it at the time? You know, like that's what I mean by the landscape changing. It's like, and even your view on gay marriage, like I would have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure I think it's lost ground, but most people on the right support gay marriage now. Although in recent years it started shifting. Yeah.
That's interesting too, with like the way the landscape changes. I think it was in Trump. You know, Trump appeared at the RNC in 2016 and unfurled a pride flag, and he got cheers for it. And there were a lot of people that had voted for Obama that switched to Trump after Bernie got knocked out. And one of the issues that people would bring up is that he was moving left on social issues that made it okay or made it acceptable. And they're like, okay, if he's going to be here, I have friends, and we're going to vote for him. And you know, even today, Trump is still relatively moderate on a lot of these positions compared to where even Hillary Clinton was. But he would be called far right. So I think we understand that. One of the challenges that I see with trying to rate a news organization, you mention you're looking for the obvious biases and how they report things. But what if somebody presents something very neutrally, but it's just fake?
Yeah, I mean, that's a different category entirely. Like that's misinformation, if you want to use that term.
But if you're not tracking for it.
What's that?
But if you're not tracking for fact.
We do track for that. Like our main thing isn't fact checking, but we have folks on staff who are like keeping an eye out for that, and that is something we would like write a blog about, or like, you know, we would point that out. And we definitely have to make sure that whatever we're presenting on our homepage is factual. Like we're admitting that our entire process is to present it from the left, center, and right, because it's going to be reported in spun ways. But we wouldn't like post that, you know, if it was blatantly untrue, you know. So we are having to use our judgment around like what's credible information. But the lines get so blurry when you consider the fact that something can be so biased in how it's reporting that then it can lead you to conclusions that are false.
Yeah, and I think we have a tendency to see this from powerful, well-funded, legacy and left-leaning news outlets. On the right, I tend to find this from the lesser-funded and smaller news outlets. So I feel like Fox tends to do a good job. It's usually factual, but I consider Fox has their bias. They lean obviously not just in story selection, but in how they describe the news. But there are a lot of smaller conservative outlets that skew, manipulate, bias, adjectives, all those things. I'm not going to call anybody out specifically, but they exist and people can find them at AllSides. Yeah. The issue, however, is there's a handful of conservative sites that I know of, and their audience might be like 10 to 20 million per month. Then you look at the bigger legacy left-leaning outlets, and it's 50 to 100 million unique not unique, but page views per month. And so therein lies the challenge that I'm trying to figure out. Let me say this. I had a debate recently. I don't even know if I'm supposed to mention this, but there's a debate coming out. Hey guys, take a look. Where I argued that the political violence overlaps more with the mainstream political left than it does with the mainstream political right. And the reason why I define it this way is that it's not meaningful to a voter to go to them and say the right commits most political violence, because you're making it sound like Ted Cruz supporters and Charlie Kirk fans are going around beating people or smashing windows. So when you look at the data from, say, the FBI or the Cato Institute or some of these other, ADL, what they describe as right wing does not align with American politics. So a white supremacist living in Arkansas who punched his wife was listed as a right wing political, but that's not telling a vote or anything. So I look at this similarly to let me finish that thought. When you see the riots, when you see Black Lives Matter, when you see the killing of Charlie Kirk, when you see recently we had a Democrat staffer come out and call for the death of Republicans. We've seen Democrat politicians raise money for rioters in the George Floyd riots, for instance. That is not to say the Democrats are calling or advocating for violence, but there's an overlap between what they advocate for and what we see in the streets: shooting up of Tesla facilities, ramming of ICE vehicles. You don't get that with conservatives. Nobody's going around and When immigration is a big issue. You don't see right-wing dudes in MAGA hats going around and rioting and knocking down migrants or anything like that. We don't see something comparable. So the issue then is what is meaningful to the layman, to the average person, when they're navigating the space? If they're saying, I want to know who the violent, dangerous people are, and the ADL, Cato, and the FBI say the right, and they go, whoa. What happens then is they say Charlie Kirk is hateful. He's spreading this hate. Someone shoots him in the neck. Whereas Charlie Kirk kicked out white supremacists from his events, wouldn't allow them in. So it's not really meaningful, not really helping someone understand something. The challenge that I have now, and with labeling it out left or right, let me put it like this. I believe that if all sides were to add an accuracy rating based on whether something had a legitimate primary source alongside the bias, you'd find that many of the left-leaning outlets are going to have lower accuracy ratings than the lean right. I would argue that many of the outlets that are just labeled right on all sides probably have a decent amount of inaccuracies. I would say that the lean left and left probably have massive inaccuracies. And then center and lean right probably have the least amount of inaccuracies.
It'd be interesting to look at, and we get asked to do this all the time, to look at accurate, because people just want to be told, like, who can I trust?
Yeah.
And and it's tricky territory though, because our staff is multi-partisan, right? So we have people on the left, center, and right on staff. So there are times when like the left and right really disagrees on reality, right? So we're not only navigating like the exterior landscape, but our internal landscape as well, making decisions as a multi-partisan team. We're not all looking at the world the same way. And so, but what we have talked about is adding some nuance to these ratings. So we've added like a numerical scale so that you can see because a lot of outlets that we had rated center, they were like center left, and we needed a way to display that. So like BBC, so we introduced this scale a couple of years ago that's like +6 to -6, -6 being the most left, +6 being the most right, and BBC's like -0.8. They're like right on the cusp, right? And we hear all the time, why do you have BBC as center? And we're like, first of all, we're rating their digital news, not their TV news, and we have them like right on the cuff, so look at the nuance. But we're realizing now that there is a need to add additional nuance in terms of like pro and anti-establishment, right? Because like, and then that shifts so quickly too, because like Trump was the brick in the establishment candidate, but now is he the establishment? Like he's the establishment.
Right.
So we also need a way to rate these outlets based on whether or not they're in favor of the establishment and from what angle, and are they pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and then how quickly can we, be on top of that and make sure that our ratings are reflecting the current landscape? Because, we're a small team, and, that's why, we need people to support us so we can do this and provide those sort of shortcuts for people, like you said. Like the average voter doesn't have time to, like you and I sit here and sift through this all day, but the average voter, like they're working,
A good point to make too, as it pertains to perception of bias, is that if there could be a conservative on X, and they see an article from the BBC that is just heavily biased and incorrect, and off that one or maybe 2 or 3 articles they see posted by a conservative influencer or by someone they trust, they go, the BBC is far left.
Right.
Then you guys come in, read 500 articles, and say, actually, most of the reporting they do is boring, moderate, through the middle. So for, be you on the left or the right, you're not going to be looking at the BBC's reporting on the financial markets. You're going to be looking at the culture war issues.
Mostly political stuff, yeah.
And so if there is if there are 500 articles and within them you have a tendency to only read the most shocking of political news, you're going to assume every article must be biased while ignoring the fact that they put out probably thousands of articles per day.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're having to make our judgment, like, well, how many of them are showing bias, and if a lot of them aren't, it's going to like push them more to the center. But like it's like we're having to make these judgments and have these conversations internally all the time. It's not easy.
The challenge is, in the big picture, left and right isn't enough. So you mentioned establishment and anti-establishment. How about budget?
Sure.
Financial backers, public or private.
Yep.
And then accuracy.
Yeah.
And then you're creating this it's like not even a left-right spectrum, it's a sphere.
It's a sphere. Yeah, exactly.
It's like impossible for someone to look through.
Yeah, and when we developed this, we're like, okay, we're going to create sort of like a compass for people to start to orient themselves in the media landscape and in the political landscape so they can understand better the information that's coming through to them is coming from a perspective. Like, we want to provide people those tools so that they're not getting manipulated and they can decide for themselves. But yeah, it is this infinitely complex project. And if we add that complexity, it's like, well, then are we doing what we want to be doing, which is like helping people to have these tools that allow them to assess more quickly what's going on? It's a complicated question because we can add those layers of complexity, but then, how effective is our tool? So, and we want to be adding more complexity. We've also talked about an economic and social scale. That's like the classic, one.
Yeah.
Where, if you look at any of our ratings, we've got the, left, center, right rating. But then if you read on the page, like, it's almost like a Wikipedia of bias. It's like, but not bias like Wikipedia is. And it's just all these details about like what we're seeing and the perspectives that this outlet is showing. So there's a ton of complexity there. And we've always acknowledged that. There's like libertarianism versus collectivism. There's authoritarian versus libertarian, and how do we capture all of that and then still have a useful tool where people can go and get a broad view without spending all of their time reading about all of this?
This is the big challenge.
Yeah.
I think it is very valuable for somebody to, again, fan of AllSides, because you can see these ratings and there's the best attempt possible with a multi-partisan, group plus the public to try and figure out what is, but it's increasingly becoming so detached that it almost isn't left right anymore. And I sort of see it as so I've interviewed a handful of people that we've talked about the bifurcation of American politics. And I would argue that there exist in the United States today two distinct countries within the, how do you describe it? Two nations in the borders of one country. I always mix up, I think nation is the people, country is the borders, is however, I don't know, academic question. But you have a multicultural democracy and a constitutional republic, and they view the world completely differently, to the point where it's not a question of do you lean left or right, do you exist in an entire other reality? And so in that capacity, there's no such thing as lean left or lean right or even center. In this modern worldview, the way I see it is center is, I would describe let me say it like this. As I mentioned earlier, in tribalism, if that's the perspective we're going through, I have no problem with being called on the right, if that represents a right tribal worldview. However, if we're trying to rate actual policy positions, economic positions, support or opposition for certain candidates, then it doesn't necessarily make sense for there even to be a center. So look, let me try and explain it like this. When I read the news all day, every day, I find that the legacy media outlets are heavily biased to such a degree that they're misleading people. They're using standard social engineering tactics, either through omission or through what is described as assumptive reasoning. And that is when the easiest way to explain this manipulation technique would be place two Legos in front of an individual and let them assume that they connect. So, or one way is two jigsaw puzzle pieces that clearly could fit together, and the person will assume they should fit together when they may not. And so you present information to someone where you say something like, John Smith was involved in a car accident yesterday, period. He is now serving 3 years in prison, period. You never said that the car accident is the reason why he went to prison. And so this is what we see in the legacy media all the time, to where it's become problematic in trying to actually cite news when I know they do this. And then what we have to do is we have to try and pull 3-4 different sources. What ends up happening is I look at the centrists, and all I end up seeing is people who are entertaining lies for the purpose of not appearing biased. So when you guys say, I lean right or whatever, my rebuttal is, in a tribal sense, agreed. In a news and fact-based sense, this is an argument of we have to entertain the manipulations and lies from legacy outlets in order to have a scale exist at all.
Well, I mean, like what you're doing is not just strictly news reporting, here are the facts for your audience. Like, you are layering in your perception and your thoughts on what's going on, right?
Certainly.
So, but the center, I think a misunderstanding about our center rating is that, like, everybody wants to think that they're the center, that they are the reasonable middle, that, like, that their views ought to constitute the center. That's actually something we struggle with a lot with these ratings, is that when people are rating something center, it's like they're like using that as a stand-in for like what's reasonable or what ought to be the standard or the like middle of the Overton window, so to speak, like the mainstream view. That's not what our center rating is saying. And like I said, like, the rating was designed to show you how far away media is straying from just like objective fact. But there is an ideological component to it, where it's like, what would a center ideology be? And maybe it is like borrowing some ideas from the left and right. But even if that's true, we've got some complications where you've got horseshoe theory, right? So like, often the far right sounds like the far left in terms of what they want the government to be doing economically or whatever, right? Or like the major thing they disagree on might be like social issues. So it is, so like, are we back to center? Like,
But that's why I draw the distinction between tribalism.
yeah.
So the left has their tribe.
Yeah.
They focus on certain stories. They care about certain issues. The right has their tribe. But for in that capacity, there is no center. So that's why if you call me right in a tribal sense, I'm like, certainly. You know, I don't agree with the multicultural democratic worldview. I think I consider it to be an invasive worldview on the American constitutional republic, which has always had a progressive and liberal element. So to me, within these two worldviews, you actually have a distinct left and right among them. So I, as a supporter of the American Constitution and the American institutions, the sovereignty of this nation, its borders, I'm left-leaning. I go to a conservative event, and I'm far left. I'm a liberal. I'm being argued with. I'm not wearing a suit. I'm wearing jeans and a hoodie or something. I'm arguing why I think traditional pro-choice is right, and we shake hands after the fact, but I am the left in the room. Then you have the Lincoln Project that will go to a Democrat event with Democratic Socialists or whatever, and they are all conservatives and right-wing in the room. My policy views and politics are to the left of the Lincoln Project. So when you end up with the tribal view of things, there's no center at all. Because I would be politically left of Bill Kristol and these Lincoln Project guys who hate Trump. They would be to the right of me, but clearly we're on the other side. So then when it comes to the question of bias in news, that's where I bring up the idea that centrism, to me, at this point, because of the bifurcation in reality, centrism just represents people willing to entertain manipulations from one side with a tendency towards factual inaccuracies, just so that they can appear unbiased. Now, I understand your bias selection system or your charting system, 16 different criteria and all of these things. My point is just on the issue of the facts, that if you were to present a story, and let me put it this way. Let me ask you this. If The Hill wrote that Democrats were explicitly incorrect on this issue, Republicans were explicitly correct, is that biased?
I mean, correct. Like, if they were correcting a claim that a Democrat made, they're saying a Democrat said this and he's wrong. Or
yeah, if there was an article written by, I say The Hill, but let's just choose any centrist outlet, and it said Democrats introduced a policy based on a story that was false. They are wrong. Like, this policy would not be effective. Republicans countered with this, which data has shown is true. Is that biased? If
The Hill was saying this policy would not be effective, then yes, it's biased, because they're layering on their interpretation on top of what's going on. Like, what's unbiased would just be to say, Democrats introduced this bill, Republicans say this about it. And then, I mean, you would want the journalist to provide the facts of what it is based on. But the thing is if a journalist wants to be center and the facts are contested, they need to actually present that and attribute it to third parties, because if things are contested, like, you really need to be pointing to a source, right? Like, this person says this person says that, so I think
this is the challenge.
Yeah, this is the challenge, because I think everybody wants one source of truth. But even journalists, like, can't really do that without being biased sometimes, because it might mean aligning with one side or the other when something's like interpretive.
I think if the policy was, well, let me phrase it like this. Like the wealth tax is a really great example.
Okay.
Wealth tax cannot work. It's impossible. And there's a factual basis for this claim. You cannot tax for a cash payment on a nebulous hard asset. A billionaire. Elon Musk, a great example. So I recently saw this clip of a comedian, Bobby Lee, saying it's disgusting. There's a trillionaire. If that were me, I'd give away everything but $1 billion. Why do you need it anyway? Here's the problem with these policies introduced by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. First, it's illegal for Elon Musk to give away his shares of SpaceX. He'd be violating SEC laws. How can you, as a news reporter, not inform the people that this policy from the Democrats is literally, legally, and mathematically impossible? You'd be biased for doing so, even though what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
So the only thing you could do is lie, omit information so that you appear not biased to one side.
I don't think that is the only thing they can do. Like, they can definitely explain the content. I think there would be a way to report on that in a way that gives the facts, that presents what each side is saying and their arguments for or against this policy, that leaves the journalist in neutral territory. I think there would be a way to craft that piece. And so I see what you're saying, but like there's a way to craft a balanced, fair piece of journalism without omitting, lying, or appearing to align with one side or the other.
Calling the Democrats ignorant or liars is going to make you biased no matter how you cut it.
Well, if you use those terms, yes.
I mean, therein lies the challenge. Ignorant is not meant to be derisive. It's just a reference to a lack of knowledge. So if I was I actually think it would be deceptive. So this is an opinion and my personal bias. Elizabeth Warren knows full well a wealth tax is impossible based on how she's describing it. I do not believe it is reasonable to conclude that someone in her position, with her knowledge of financial systems, FEC, SEC, everything she's been involved in, I do not think it's reasonable for a person in her position to be ignorant to the fact that Elon Musk is contractually and legally barred from selling his shares, which would mean if you tried to tax those shares, there's literally nothing he can do. There's no legal mechanism for that to exist. She knows this. I think it is completely unreasonable. Now, that's me saying my opinion on the matter. Would it be more or less biased for me to say Elizabeth Warren is either ignorant of the law in a prominent political position which requires her to understand the law, or she is intentionally lying? Is that a biased statement?
I mean, yeah, because you're interpreting her position. Like, if I saw that in a news article, well, you're assigning character also. Like, you're saying,
wait. She is either ignorant of how the law and finance works, or she is intentionally lying. It's one or the other. That's not a biased statement. But this can't be anything else.
Right, but like, if we're thinking about a straight news piece that's describing this issue, describing both sides, it is part of the journalist's job to assume good faith on the part of those parties and describe what they're saying.
Oh, that's biased.
But then that's why we need commentators like you to bring this up and say, well, she's either ignorant or lying. For a journalist,
no. That's what a journalist should say. She is either ignorant or lying. Me, as a commentator, will say she's lying.
Yeah. Well,
a journalist should write, the law does not permit Elon Musk to liquidate his shares in order to pay a tax on these shares.
That's not biased to point out.
Which would mean the advocacy for these laws are either based upon ignorance of the law or an intentional manipulation of the issue.
Well, there's where you get into the bias. Would mean is you're now interpreting, right? You gave the facts and now you're interpreting. And so that's where the bias comes in, because if you say seemingly, it would mean, it could mean, that's where the journalist is starting to like layer on their perception and their interpretation. And that's better suited to the opinion pages, the commentaries. If we saw that in a news piece, we would flag that part of the sentence. We wouldn't flag the first part that you said where you describe the laws.
Is it reasonable or meaningful to your audience to assert good or bad as a fact?
You mean for a journalist to assert?
So I'm a journalist, and I want to report on Elizabeth Warren's position on the wealth tax.
Yeah.
I know full well that the wealth tax is not possible to be implemented the way she's described it. Should I presume good faith?
On her part?
Yes.
I mean, if you're a journalist that's trying to remove any sort of display of your own interpretation or assessment of her character or whatever it is, then you would want to present her position as if she holds that position in good faith. But you can do that in a way that's neutral. So you're saying you think it's biased to
assume good or bad faith would be biased.
Okay.
The neutral position would be to say there are two potentialities, and we don't want to assume good or bad faith. So this is either an ignorance of the law or an intentional manipulation.
Yeah, but you're still making an interpretation and getting away from just the fact. The fact is Elizabeth Warren says this. The other fact is the law allows this. Those are the facts. Once you start saying, and it means that Elizabeth Warren is, then you're interpreting. Then you're adding a layer of analysis on top of the facts. That's where bias comes in.
So then the neutral position is to say Elizabeth Warren proposed a wealth tax, which is illegal and could not be implemented.
I mean, if that's the fact, it is illegal, and they would need to change the laws to make it legal, then you could say that.
To be fair, I said it very bluntly, but I think you'd write something to the effect of Elizabeth Warren proposed today a wealth tax on the wealthiest Americans who have an income of over $100 million. The tax law would create an incongruity in U.S. SEC law where these individuals would not, in fact, be allowed to liquidate their assets for the purpose of paying these taxes. Thus, the law would likely fail.
Getting into wood, but okay, pretty much. Yeah, you describe the facts, and you just describe the facts, and you avoid adding your own interpretation. Because this is the thing. This is why Americans
pending alterations to SEC law, this law will fail.
I mean, you could. I still that predictive nature. I would be careful with, right? Because this is why Americans don't trust journalists, because they're not disciplined in not inserting their own interpretation of laws or proposals or policies. It takes discipline to not add that last piece where you're like, and this is going to fail, right? Or and this is a bad idea. Like that. That is why we have amongst the lowest trust in the world, in the United States, in news media, and for good reason, because journalists are not disciplined in keeping their perspectives out of things and just giving Americans the facts. And like you talk, and there's this shrinking middle where the traditional standards, and I say traditional standards of journalism with a grain of salt, because in the early days we had yellow journalism, we had all these things where there were perspectives still being inserted. But let's say like the journalism that I learned in journalism school, where you are a disciplined member of the media that is a neutral third party. Not to say you don't actually have your opinions, you do, but your practice, your vocation is to be that neutral third party that just gives the facts and is disciplined enough not to add all of your little interpretations of what's going on. That is hard to do. People aren't very good at it because we have this shrinking middle. Our center ratings are very small. And then we have all of these, financial incentives not to be disciplined in that manner because, you find your audience, you rack up views, things go viral if you're also adding that spin. So like
this is I completely agree with you. I understand what you're saying, and so I suppose the conclusion of that through line would be to write an article where you say SEC law would not legally allow Elon Musk to liquidate his shares to pay a wealth tax, and that's it.
Yeah, and you leave it at that. And this is the thing that like we're just not seeing in American journalism anymore, is just that neutrality, and we really believe that if more journalists could be more tightly disciplined around what they're writing, then Americans would trust them. But people don't trust them because they sense something's off and that they're being manipulated and they're being led to conclusions and things like that. And, there just used to be a much harder line between the news and opinion pages, but now it's all video. But
now it's all the same.
Yeah, but now it's all the same. And so people are like, I don't even know what's going on. They're like, I don't even know where to go to know what's going on.
Therein lies the challenge. I mean, we used to have a news team here, and we ended up getting rid of it. Because we did news exactly as you describe it. Like I mentioned with the Trump quote, It was not our position to say that Trump is lying.
Yeah.
And we're not running a fact check.
No interpretation. Yeah.
And we were called fake news for it. We were attacked by NewsGuard as biased and incorrect, and that has negative repercussions on our advertisers.
Yeah.
So we just dumped NewsGuard. I was like, wow, And I emailed them and said, what is the remedy to correct this, right? We want to have a perfect score. We want to, because the New York Times is a perfect score. What they basically said was, if the New York Times says it, it's true. If you say it and it disagrees with the New York Times, it's false. And so we were like, well, the New York Times isn't just de facto correct on everything, but this is what NewsGuard does. They use ABC, CBS, NBC, and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal as de facto true. And then if I can prove them wrong, it doesn't matter. I'm lying because they're the source.
Well, do you know who founded NewsGuard and who's behind NewsGuard?
Well, I know Bill Gates Microsoft was a big sponsor. Like they had a licensing deal, which...
Well, NewsGuard's pretty much made up of guys, I can't remember some of their names, but they are legacy media guys,
right.
So like to them, they're like probably thinking like, oh, these establishment legacy institutions they've got it down, they're doing a good job. Like they're not thinking like you and I might be, where we're like, are they doing a good job? Like, and are they?
I think that's left biased.
Well,
I think what they're doing is we need to destroy independent media that's challenging stealing our market.
That's
my right bias.
Okay, yeah, and they do. I think NewsGuard does rate. If you look at their ratings and compare them against like AllSides bias ratings, they rate the outlets on the right as untrustworthy and inaccurate. Like, so then it's like,
right.
How useful is this? Like, are you really applying like an even standard? Or are you just saying that the legacy media is the source of truth, like you just said, and if you're not aligning with it, then you're inaccurate and you're not trustworthy?
But, going back to the conversation about Warren, just railing on her for some reason. But no, we're talking about how do you avoid bias. But this is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. It is most useful, in my opinion, to calmly and rationally describe what it is that they proposed with the wealth tax as the easiest example of something that doesn't make sense. And I believe that it is biased to the left to omit that what they are saying makes no sense.
Well, here's another issue that it comes up here. So like we just sort of workshopped like a way that you could state what's going on and what the laws are and whether or not it would be allowed without adding your interpretation of what's going on in Elizabeth Warren's head with either being ignorant or lying. So basically, like, how much do you trust the audience? How much do you trust the reader to look at the facts and draw their own conclusion that this is something that wouldn't work? This is another problem that I see in the media a lot, is that the people creating the news or reporting on the news don't trust the reader to come to the appropriate, what reasonable people might find is the appropriate conclusion. So they then are tempted to insert, spin or interpretation, or because they're wanting to make sure that the reader knows that this wouldn't work, that this is a bad policy. And again, like that is straying from objective journalism and it is inserting bias. And so like, again, like that's the role of the commentators, is to be clear on that, on those interpretations and try to influence the reader or the listener.
I agree, and I'll stress that I don't know that there's a real answer to any of this, how you actually track for this stuff. But to the point of, just again using the wealth tax as the example as to what we're saying, if you don't know about contractual restrictions and SEC restrictions on selling shares, and so instead you say Elizabeth Warren has proposed a wealth tax on the wealthiest Americans who make over $100 million. Elon Musk, for instance, who is now worth trillions of dollars, would be required to pay X amount of dollars. The standard of living in the United States the GDP is $95,000. That would be biased towards the left, because you've chosen to include facts that make it appear as though it's reasonable for her to do and possible. And one would argue that if I included the SEC has restrictions on this, that would just be an attempt to strike her down. They would call that bias towards the right.
I mean, there are ways to balance this out, though, because you can, like, this is the art of journalism, right? Then you start to quote people. You quote people who are in favor. You give them some airtime. Then you quote people who are critical, right? There are ways to craft a piece where overall the piece measures out and is balanced.
And then what if I find the stupidest conservative but well-known and the smartest liberal who's well-known, and I intentionally include bad arguments, and I say, look, I was I was just getting a balanced view on these things, it would be labeled center despite the intentional
No, not
manipulation.
by us. We would absolutely point that out. We'd be like, oh, but look, they chose the most uncharitable or ridiculous quote from this side that characterizes this side as unreasonable or stupid or whatever, and then they chose this academic. We're looking at that stuff all the time. That's why what we do is so complicated, because it's not as simple as, oh, they quoted both sides.
So then center maybe isn't the right way to describe. Like maybe there's left, right, lean right, and then neutral.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is we've had to add disclaimers around our center rating where we're like, we're not giving you a stamp of approval if you're center, because there's all this nuance, right? It doesn't automatically mean you're doing a good job, but it might mean you're not like quite in the lean left or quite in the lean right territory. Our stamp of approval is something we call our balance certification, where we apply our methods of bias review and scrutiny to media outlets, and if they hit a very narrow framework, and they're not displaying a lot of bias, or they're equally displaying perspectives across the political spectrum, they might earn our balance certification. And we've only had a couple of outlets earn that. And that's like, it has to undergo our audit process, which is very meticulous. So that's our stamp of, center's not our stamp of approval, and center has nuance. But I think people look at our bias chart or they look at our ratings and they're like, oh, I should just go with the center, or the center's doing a good job. And it's like, that's not what we're saying, but it's hard to convey that to people.
I think I don't think news outlets are possible anymore. It's one of the reasons we got rid of ours. The example again, we had thousands of articles, but I would make sure that if the article had any ounce of opinion, speculation, or otherwise, we would put an opinion label on it.
Yeah, perfect.
And when we got attacked for simply reporting that Trump said a thing, it was like very banal. It was a 300-word article. Trump appeared at a rally today in Daytona. He said this. That was it. And we get attacked for being biased and manipulative or lying or whatever. I just said, we don't make money on this anymore. Or I don't. It's not about us. It's that we launched this. We can't monetize it. People are not interested in reading an article that simply just tells you what happened. They want something more from it. So ultimately, we found it to be, it doesn't work. The Free Press recently sold for $150 million to CBS, and the Free Press is just, it's an opinion editorial. It's not, I'm not saying that derisively.
No, yeah.
Every single article is there.
It's commentary.
It's all commentary from the news. I don't think you could do just news where if you wrote Elizabeth Warren proposed today a wealth tax on the wealthiest Americans who earn over $100 million, the policy would tax them at 1% for everything over $100 million. Flat. That's it. Nobody's clicking that.
Well, I mean, one thing to point out, though, is that to the degree that local news still exists, it's still the most trusted source of news. And I would say that if you watch, I don't know what local news you have in this area, but if you watch local news, they are still doing that traditional, objective, neutral style of journalism. And so it's not like it's, I think you're right that it is difficult in this, economic system to just do down the line, middle of the road news, and people want to be entertained and they want to be told what to think, and that's another form of them just wanting a shortcut, right? Like, I just want to be told how to interpret this, right? Because it's going to take extra cognitive load from me to decide. But there is still a place for it. It is challenging, but again, if you care about trust, if you care about actually being trusted by your audience, those are standards to consider.
I think one of the challenges is it's an arms race. So a few things play a role in this. The algorithm, sensationalism, shock, profound news, groundbreaking things, earth-shattering. These are the things that are going to get clicked on.
Yeah.
And so if you want to make money in this space, it's not about information. It's about eyeballs. It's an attention economy with both sides, both left and right, trying as hard as possible to maximize viewership. You are required, I'll describe it this way. How did we get to the point we are in hyperpartisanship? A really great example is Mike.com. Are you familiar with Mike? I don't know if they're still around.
No.
In the late 2000s, early 2010s, they were a Ron Paul libertarian internet-based bias site, right? And then once intersectional feminism and these issues started going viral, their editorial position shifted. And this was because, in my opinion, the Facebook algorithm began to prioritize intersectional feminism accidentally. You can see this in the LexisNexis data when white supremacy and racism and all these things skyrocket. What happens is, in the early days of Facebook, you got content from who you followed. But as people had more pages to follow and more people to follow, Facebook had to figure out how to maximize quality. And so they decided algorithmic. We're going to show you the content you are most likely to interact with. So Ron Paul was going massively viral in the late 2000s. So a website launches. But then in the early 2010s, people started to find within the algorithm, if you wrote an article that said, person is racist, you'd get 1 million views. If you wrote an article that said, person is sexist, you'd get 1 million views. But when you wrote person is racist and sexist, those keywords, it's not racist, it's not X time plus Y, it's X times Y. It was an exponential increase because the way the algorithm works is for every view you get, it exponentially increases your position in the algorithm for distribution. So what ends up happening is it goes from police brutality, which became the dominant form of content on the platform. There was a website that was ranked, I think, the 400th in the world. And all it did was post police brutality videos because they were shocking and they would get play. And so this results in people who live in this world of Black Lives Matter and police brutality seeing nothing but this stuff. But then when these sites like Mike, as an example, discovered that combining terms got you even more money, even more views, you saw the rise of the left multicultural democracy worldview. Here's the issue. If I write in 2015, Donald Trump is racist, and I get 1 million views, if I write that same article the next day and nobody clicking it, I have to write Donald Trump is more racist. The next day I have to write Donald Trump is the most racist. Donald Trump is almost as bad as Hitler.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is as bad as Hitler. Donald Trump is Hitler. Donald Trump is worse than Hitler because you have to keep feeding the addiction. And so I think that's where we're at right now, where if you just wrote Donald Trump says thing, who cares?
Well, I mean, this is why All Sides exists, because we are trying to get people out of their filter bubble, because the algorithm is filtering for, like you said, what you're most likely to click on, and then it like feeds the beast, right? And then you just get more of that and more of that, right? And it's true. It impacts what people believe about the world. And the police brutality example was perfect because, yeah, if you're only seeing those videos, it like makes it appear as this really, magnified problem in the world, right? Even if those incidences, like, statistically aren't that many, if you're seeing it on your feed all the time, you're like, this is a problem, we need to take to the streets, right? So media and how it's being fed to us and how it's framed is impacting, what we believe about the world, how we vote, like how we treat our neighbors, all of these things. It has like real world societal implications. So like, what do you think about a world that like those are the incentives and the media creators follow the incentives? Like, what kind of world is that creating? Like, we need other solutions that kind of break this. Yeah. What's that?
So we're done.
I mean, yeah, like this is the thing is like we are being challenged to solve this problem. All Sides is one of the solutions. It's obviously, I remember when Twitter was not owned by Musk, so it was still Twitter, and it had the I think it was like the What's Happening tab, and you would click on it and it'd be like a news story.
They still have that.
Do they? Okay. Yeah. I feel like I see Grok now, and it's like an AI summary. But this
right, yes.
Yeah, no, but this was like actually like a
Editorial.
news tab that was like pre-Grok, and it was it would be a story, and then it would be like tweets from prominent outlets on the topic, but it was always left-leaning outlets and commentary, always. And I was like, okay, well, it would be cool to see like Twitter X like take the All Sides treatment of things and actually be dedicated to giving you a balanced view on any topic.
X should do that.
Yeah, I know. I've said this for years, and because they
sounds
were
like something Elon would love.
Well, they were always being accused of X was always being accused of bias, and even now, like they've got Grok summaries, but it's still showing you like top tweets, and it's like, why not be explicitly in favor of breaking this algorithmic manipulation and these filter bubbles and give things the All Sides treatment? We also looked at search engines and news aggregators. So like you go to Google News, you go to Apple News, and you want to get like a broad view of the news. Well, what are they showing you? Largely left-leaning outlets, outlets that we rate as on the left. So even when you go to these tech tools that are trying to like account for this problem of algorithmic bias, they're still biased. So like
I got some fun examples.
Okay.
When it was Twitter,
Yeah.
they ran for 2 weeks a story claiming that I stole a cat.
Stole a cat?
Stole a cat.
I don't remember
And
this.
the best way I can describe it is completely fabricated in every respect.
What do you mean Twitter ran the story? It was in the
In
news
the What's
tab?
Happening tab, they put a story from the Daily Beast accusing me of stealing a cat, and it was written to the precise of legalese to trick the audience, it was Daily Beast, into believing that I stole a cat without ever explicitly stating that I did.
Yeah.
And the real story is that we had one of my companies had an employee. One of my other companies had an employee. Employee A leaves cat with employee B, for which I have nothing to do with. I instruct employee A to get their cat from employee B, and employee B says, okay, employee A refuses to do it. So the Daily Beast writes Tim Pool steals cat.
Oh my God.
And even though the police explicitly told the writer Tim Pool did not have possession of the cat, he had never had possession of the cat, they still decided to headline the article, Tim Pool accused of stealing cat.
Yeah, and they get views and they get clicks, and it's all feeds the finances.
Here's the best part.
Yeah.
Elon takes over. Now the What's Happening or whatever it is Grok. It's AI.
Yeah.
So a couple weeks ago, it ran a story. Tim Pool accused of sexual assault and facing criticism from his Nazi tattoo on his chest. Do you know who that actually was?
That'd be Plattner.
That would be Plattner, not Tim Pool.
Yeah.
Because the AI made a mistake and it put my name instead of Grant Plattner's.
Wow, incredible.
And we've got screenshots of it, and I was getting spammed. People were texting me being like, this is what Grok is saying about you right now. And I just tweeted, haha. I was like, Grok, no, like.
Why? Well,
Yeah.
okay, this is another thing. Okay, so you also need the people reading this stuff to know how to interact with it, right? So like we're another thing AllSides is working on right now are these like media literacy tools that can be used in schools so that there's basically like overlays on the news content that's like helping the students to start to see, you know, bias by viewpoint if they're not quoting both sides, or slant, or a spin word, right? Like, I think that example is just factually wrong, so I'm not sure that a media literacy overlay would really help in that respect.
Yeah.
But like, you also need people to be able to know how to interact. They need to be media literate, basically. And
It's tough.
especially now when it's like in our pockets, it's in our hands constantly. Like, I didn't have a media literacy class in school, you know, but it's like, I would argue that's more necessary now, right? Like, because we have this population that's just constantly ingesting media, and we don't even know how to interpret it or interact with it, or like how to think critically about it. So you just like believe whatever you see.
It's because it's a job. You know, I always describe
Yeah.
it like I don't expect a teacher or a carpenter to learn how to be a journalist
Yeah.
to try and parse through all the information.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I said, that's why we exist. But even then, it gets complicated. Like we've just been having an hour-long conversation about how we even define left and right.
I know,
so,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess I can summarize all of the challenges for you guys very easily. First question is, how do you rate Elon Musk?
Okay, he's lean right. However, we had a lot of conversation about that, and a lot of the panelists were saying he was center, and somebody even said he was lean left.
He's center.
Yeah, and so
You know, I don't, again, on a tribal matter, he's clearly, if we're talking pure tribal politics, he is right. He's not lean
he's with
right.
that
He is
he's
right.
with that tribe,
He is.
yeah.
He
Yeah.
posted the Uwe Boll citizen vigilante film. You know, do you know this movie?
oh yes,
Where the guy goes and he's killing criminals, and
right,
some of
yes.
them are migrants.
yeah.
I mean, that is right.
Yeah.
But I would actually consider Elon to be centrist, and I think the challenge for you guys is, I think it's silly to call him left leaning.
Yeah,
He's tribally right, but he's politically center. But I believe that moderates, if you look at the polling right now, independent voters favor the Republicans by ridiculous margins. It's like 2-1 or more. And it's been that way for like 5 or 6 years. But the challenge for you is what you are, as AllSides, espousing, this dream of like the job we're going to do, the mission we have, showing people what the biases are. Elon's going to go, that's brilliant. We need this. Liberals are going to go, you're far right. That's bad.
Oh, well, that's a challenge. Yes.
So if the methodology itself is right wing, right? This is the challenge, I suppose, is Elon Musk as a lean right personality would mean AllSides' mission itself is right leaning.
You mean if he were?
Well, let me put it like this: like the people that support what you do and agree with you are largely going to be on the right. The left is going to call you biased. They're going to say you're placating, you're defending, you're platforming, you're apologizing.
Those challenges exist, but we do have a lot of liberal supporters. And so here's the thing, this is what I always point back to, is the fact that our process is trustworthy because it includes people on the left, center, and right. So if you look at how we are doing things, if you look at our actual methodology, our actual process, we are not by any means ignoring the views of liberals. We're displaying them as well, right next to the views of people on the right, and they are involved in our bias ratings. So to say that we're, like, I get what you're saying. I've had similar thoughts where,
I'm not saying you guys are biased.
But but I'm saying if people are going to like say that they perceive us as being like on the right, I can just point back to our process. Like
I'm saying the mission itself is right leaning.
I mean, well, is it? I mean, you've got like Media Matters.
I'm saying
they're not doing ratings
from a tribal perspective.
Yeah. Well, which part of the mission is right leaning from you?
The idea that you want to through a specific quantifiable methodology, track the bias and the biases of various individuals and outlets to understand the nature of reality. This is all right-coded. I mean, the left ideology of personal truths would fly in the face of your methods.
I mean, I see what you're saying.
Lived experiences trumping meritocracy and the scientific method.
I mean, but there are other ratings agencies that they tend to like rate more from a left viewpoint. So like there is some interest in this type of project from folks on the left. But
are your employees on a schedule?
What do you mean?
Like, do you have people who work and it's like you're expected to be at the office at a certain time? Within reason?
I mean, yeah.
Well, that's right wing. The Smithsonian put out a white supremacy chart recently. They were even questioned of this in Congress because it says that having a schedule and being on time is white supremacist.
I remember that.
So I'm not going to pretend that every single left person agrees with this, but when you take a look at the ascendancy of the Democratic Socialists in New York, Colorado, California, Washington, et cetera, they believe all these things.
Well, I mean, I think
they're a third of the Democrats.
There's always going to be people on the left and right that won't agree with our project because they are interested in influencing to assert their worldview. If that's what you want, you're not going to be interested in AllSides because AllSides is all about, a measured approach. We're hearing people out. We're curious. We want to know why people think what they think. I don't know, but how is that not classically liberal?
It is, but classically liberal is right-coded.
Well, yeah. I mean, back to the changing landscape, but
this is the again, and this is the challenge that I feel like this kind of exemplifies my view and like how this conversation comes to be. Mm-hmm. That I completely agree with what you're doing. I love what AllSides is doing. I love going to AllSides and then seeing, it makes it very easy for me because I don't want to just read Breitbart. I'm going to read the New York Times. I'm going to read MS Now, and or watch MS Now. And you know what I find every day I do this? The left tends to be wrong or misleading, and the right tends to be fairly accurate. And this is the challenge. I turn on Fox News. I'm not going to watch Laura Ingraham. I'm not going to watch Sean Hannity. I like the Five. They've got Jessica Tarlov on there. I think she's wrong quite a bit. But I think, the right is wrong sometimes too. They got 4-1, they do on the Five. But I really like, Bill Hemmer, America Reports. I find it to be spot on. Every time they run a story, and then I'm like, okay, here's what happens. I'll watch Fox in the morning, then I'll come in and I'll start finding primary sources, and I'll say, oh yeah, Fox was correct. not MS Now, not CNN. I pull up those sources and I'm like, why did they omit this? The very fine people hoax, as we describe it, is a really great example of this, that Snopes only, a few years ago or a year ago, finally wrote an article saying Trump did not call Nazis fine people. But when you turn on the likes of MS Now, they still maintain those lies. When you turn on CNN, they still maintain these lies. And the problem that we end up getting to is what encompasses the whole conversation. I certainly agree with the point you've made about how if I were to say that Elizabeth Warren is either ignorant or lying, that is to assert my interpretation of what she's doing. I feel it's correct, but still a personal interpretation. My concern is to try and play this game of being balanced at this point, to ignore. Let's try it this way. If a politician came out and said, we're going to dye the sky pink, am I supposed to just say, a politician has proposed splashing dye in the sky to turn it pink? Okay.
Yes, that's what you would say if you were reporting on it. That's what you would say. But this is why we need people like you. Our position is not that everybody that's reporting on the news or talking about the news needs to just be providing neutral, objective news. We need people like you who are also going to be like, and that's ridiculous, right?
But not even to say ridiculous, but wouldn't it be good reporting to say, this politician has proposed a policy of dyeing the sky pink. However, it is not physically possible to do.
Well, you would need to provide the facts about, they've proposed doing it in this way. Currently, this technology does not exist, right?
There's literally no way to dye the sky. I suppose you could temporarily create a puff of, green dye in the sky.
Oh, but there are ways to, even the most ridiculous things that you disagree with, that make no sense. That is the discipline of journalism, is to how do you report on it while giving people all the information that they need so they can come to their own conclusions. But there's always going to be, ideas and things that this is the other thing that we deal with a lot, is that we're because we're all sides, so we'll give you all the different perspectives on a hot button issue, right? But we're not out there picking random things that no one's discussing and giving you all the perspectives on it, right? It has to be an issue that people are actually discussing. If everybody was really discussing, can we turn the sky pink? We should do that. That would be something we would have to cover, and we would have to cover it in that disciplined way. So
I feel like there is a degree. It's not black or white. It's not binary. I understand your point on how to report the facts and let people decide, but at a certain point, something is so absurd, you are going to say this person is wrong, and you are going to assert and you're going to say it's a fact, and someone's still going to call it an opinion.
Well, if you do that as a journalist, people aren't going to trust you, because they're going to be like, you're telling me what to think. If
a Democrat came out and said that he was proposing a $100 billion budget to harvest moon cheese so that we can feed Australian sheep moon cheese, which would be beneficial because then we could buy more sheep's wool, you're going to have to say, you're going to say, this is obviously not physically possible. This is outside the realm of. My point is, if there's a question of, say, climate change, and a politician says we want to reduce carbon emissions, there's a debate as to whether or not carbon emissions, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Certainly it would be biased then, because there's an actual debate among academics, politicians, industry leaders over the merits of reducing or increasing or whatever carbon emissions. But the moon is not made of cheese. And so I use that as the most extreme example I can think of, where the challenge arises determining the level of absurdity by which you as a reporter need to inform your audience, this is not real.
Well, yeah, this is exactly where we get the current landscape that we have. Because if you're a journalist and you're on the left, this is what was going on during peak Trump years. Journalists felt like he was such a threat that it was their duty to let their audience know that this man is a fascist, and it came through in their reporting. So your argument is how we got to this point with journalism being so spun, where it's like this is going on, and instead of just telling people what's going on, I also need them to know that it's bad or it's ridiculous or whatever. That's the temptation.
But this is the left-right distinction. My argument is that when there is something that is physically, factually, or just completely insane, then there is going to be a moral duty to the journalist to point these things out. That's why I say it's a gray, it's not binary. This is the argument that I have with conservatives all the time. When they talk about the Constitution, they believe, conservatives argue, we're originalists, we follow the Constitution. They don't. That's false. Conservatives and Democrats, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, both interpret their own version of the U.S. Constitution outside of what the Founding Fathers believed the Constitution would be, particularly the amendments. There's an argument to the standard, the first several articles, like Abraham Lincoln suspending habeas corpus. But you are correct. We get to this point because of the argument I have just proposed, which is not to say I advocate for what Democrats would do or advocate for people to become mission-driven storytellers, that's how they describe it, but a fact of reality. If Democrats repeatedly come out proposing things that are destructive to this country, and it is reasonable and the underlying facts prove that what they're doing is destructive, then I believe it is imperative to point this out. Let me clarify. The left-right distinction is the left is wrong and the right is correct. Not absolutely, not all the time, but the tendencies that I see in the media when I read ABC and they lie about Trump to justify why he's a threat, versus on the right where they will criticize Donald Trump or even defend the George Floyd protesters early on. The right tends to take a good-faith approach, not always, and the left tends to take a manipulative approach for the purpose of gaining political power. Now, I'll be called biased for saying that, but I will say right now that is a statement of fact. I understand it's based on my personal, professional, and academic assessment of reading the media, but when I see someone say that outside of the tribal scale, my bias on politics is right-leaning, I would just say you've not read the news. Because when ABC, CBS, NBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, for 10 years lied about what Trump said, what he did, every single day, and then I just simply say, this is fake and they're lying, these people are, at this point, it is not an accident that these journalists for a decade plus have omitted this information. They are either intentionally not doing the research or lying to you. That is, after 10 years, I would argue, a fact statement.
A lot of what we consider mainstream or legacy journalism has veered into advocacy journalism, which is what you're describing, right? It's like that's.
And I worked there when they did. They called it mission-driven storytelling, and they explicitly told me, the president of Fusion, which was a Univision ABC joint venture, I asked him, does this mean if there is a factual news event that would be offensive to our audience, we will not report it? And he said, yes, I think that's fair.
I was on a panel of journalists that said, we need, one of them said, I'll never forget, it was like, we need to just get rid of objective journalism. And actually, there are top editors on the record saying this, objective journalism, they say it caters to like white, educate, whatever, like they take the kind of intersectionality lens to it. And that's been the trend. But again, like it's not a coincidence that as editors have taken that approach, trust in news has completely tanked. And a lot of them are like struggling. And then you've got the rise of podcasters and like all of these alternative sources. That's why. Oh,
it's so much crazier than just this. Just a brief tangent. We covered this on Timcast IRL. It's a video titled Joe Rogan Surprised as Tim Pool Exposes United Kingdom. And what they do is, and there's millions of these, it's a clip of Joe Rogan going, he said what? Then it cuts to me on a totally different podcast, Trigonometry, talking about the state of affairs in the UK with mass migration. And they trim it down, make it really punchy and fast, cut out the longer conversation. So I'm just angrily talking fast, saying, these migrants, blah, blah, blah. Then it shows Joe Rogan going, oh my. They get millions of views.
Yeah.
It's not even a real conversation. It's not even a real reaction. Mm-hmm. But to go back to what we were talking about in terms of, I worked for Vice, and I was the first, I launched Vice News. I was their first employee for a specific news division, and it was my arguing with them to do news that ultimately brought it about. And the goal was, it was sort of accidental. I went to them, I said, I want to work here. They said, we don't do field reporting, we don't do news. After like 6 months of negotiating, they said, okay, we're going to bring you on and we're going to do this, and we're going to make news its own thing. They were really great early on. Early on, they said, what is, not anymore. And this has been bad for their credibility, but I don't even know where they're at these days. I got hired by Fusion This is when the conversations became more and more prominent around what's called mission-driven storytelling. So I'll give you an example. I'm in an editorial meeting, and this was when the film Ghost in the Shell with Scarlett Johansson was coming out. I'm a big Ghost in the Shell fan. It's an anime movie, and they have an anime series. So they said, oh, why don't we talk about this movie where it's a Japanese show, but they're having a white woman play the character who's supposed to be Japanese. And I said, oh, I'm a huge Ghost in the Shell fan. Actually, Scarlett Johansson playing Motoko, the Major, is actually perfectly aligned with the story, because the story of Ghost in the Shell is about in a future where you can cyberize your brain. The Major actually has a prosthetic body. And in fact, one of the questions Bato asks the Major is, why do you choose female bodies? So this idea of a Japanese girl dying and being given a white person's body is actually the story itself. It's like a key component. And they went, no, we're going to call it racist.
I remember this whole news cycle.
They were saying that, listen, we have a mission, and we are telling stories to that mission. So when I leave the corporate press, I'm in the ABC building every day. I'm in the elevator with Whoopi Goldberg, and they are telling me explicitly, the mission is what's most important. This is what people want and what we're going to give them. I come from that perspective. I say, look, at the time, I didn't do political stuff. I was like, I'm on the ground, right? I just go and I go to various countries. I film what's going on, and I tell you what I saw, tell you what people said. They told me that I needed to understand that was biased because of the people I chose to interview. They said, are you going to go choose to interview the other people? I said, we do both. And they go, how prominent are they? The liberal activist you interviewed was a random nobody at a university, and then you interviewed a right-wing politician. That's not fair. And I said, that's who was willing to talk to us. Well, you've created a skew, so you admit it. You skewed in favor of the right-wing government because you didn't interview. Well, they didn't want to do the interview. That's too bad. You're biased. You admit it. So where we are now is, when I look at, I'll put it this way. For Timcast IRL, I have my morning show, my panel show, and now we have this show. I pull up articles, and we try our best to always use something that is considered establishment, which means it's always left skewed. So even though the source material that we present in every show is going to be the New York Times, CNN, we're right wing. And the issue is, when I pull up CNN and it lies, manipulates, we still use CNN. The fact that I said that is assumptive manipulation, or this is, what did you call it? The adjectives? What is it?
Oh, subjective qualifying adjectives. Yeah.
CNN has this in almost every single article in politics. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, but we want to use CNN because our source, the material that we are presenting that is stating a fact, is considered liberal. We're still right wing, simply for saying we shouldn't use that adjective. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not accusing you. Mm. Your definition for me as right wing is different. What I'm saying is, I called Trump retarded. What did the media write? Trump supporter, MAGA influencer criticizes Trump. Pretty sure if I'm calling Trump retarded, I'm not supporting him. So why would they qualify the headline in that way? And they all do it.
Well, they qualify you when they mention you. That recent Laura Loomer story you were mentioned in, and they call you far right. So like that's another thing that we flag. We're like, well, if you're going to add these there's a way. I get wanting to provide context for the reader and describe where someone's at, but there are ways to. When you hear far right, Tim Pool's far right, it's like far right. The reader thinks out of bounds, extreme. Right. We never use the term far right or far left. Ever. If our ratings are lean left and right, it's not far right. And I correct people if they say far right. Because I'm like, look, we're not saying who's in bounds, who's out of bounds, who's too extreme. We're not saying who's who to believe, right? But you see the legacy press using terms like that all the time, just not having the discipline.
Not the right-leaning ones.
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal and Fox News and New York Post don't.
Yeah. I mean, well.
New York Post a little bit more than the rest of them, but.
New York Post, yeah, they're doing a lot of the same stuff that the left is doing, just from the right side.
Well, they've gotten worse. I'll give you that one.
But here's the thing about the New York Post. They are explicit. If you look at their about page, how they describe themselves, they're I forget the exact terms that they use, but they're basically we're also trying to make this entertaining.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, I find that the outlets on the right are a little more honest about their approach. They're a little bit more we're coming from a conservative angle, or we're trying to make this entertaining, or whatever.
But the Wall Street Journal doesn't use these qualifying adjectives for liberals and leftists in the same way.
Well, that's the other thing is this. You know who's bad about this? This isn't even really news media, but Wikipedia. Wikipedia uses all the qualifiers for right-wing figures, far right and, whatever. Whereas if you look, I think we were comparing like Rachel Maddow's page to like Candace Owens's page, and it's hilarious because you read Rachel Maddow's page, it's just like, oh, she's just like a, academic journal. Like there's no qualifying adjectives that would tilt your view of her. But then like everybody, all the figures on the right.
Wikipedia is completely fake.
Even
as it pertains to politics.
Well, yeah, and even the co-founder has said that they have a problem.
And they've now denied that he's even a co-founder.
Oh, that's interesting.
They started saying, oh, he has nothing to do with it. And it's like, he does.
But this is just another example of like whether it's news media or Wikipedia or whatever. Like it's this information war to manipulate your view and get you to align with one side or the other, right? And if you don't know how to like. And this is why it's actually it's like almost a sign of like maybe it's a sign of civilizational decline that like our institutions that we're supposed to be trusting and relying on to give us a view so that we can decide for ourselves who we want to vote for, what we believe, all of that, and they're just manipulating us. Like what does that actually mean for our society? And even the tech companies that have implemented these, this algorithmic bias. Like
you know what we need to jump into to really get to the core of this is COVID.
Oh, well, that was
So when the legacy media outlets lied in every single article, basically every single time, this is the line of absurdity where in order to be considered a neutral news reporter, you have to knowingly lie.
Well, I mean,
or at least reiterate and espouse abject lies.
Well, what do you mean to be considered neutral? Do you mean by like reporting on what the CDC was saying at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay.
When they were lying.
Well, this is the interesting thing is like, because you can report on what the authorities are saying, and we call that actually, we have elite bias and populist bias. And this was a problem during COVID where what we were seeing was a lot of elite bias where the journalists were relying on these government institutions, right? Which historically makes sense to rely on authorities, but like, we're in this time where people don't trust the institutions.
I disagree.
Yeah,
Historically,
right?
it doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But like we're definitely in a time now, regardless of what's in the past, where people don't trust the authorities. So to not include those views, I believe, was arguably journalistic malpractice because the on the ground, what was going on was just a complete, war between. A lot of people on the ground and then what the institutions were saying we needed to be doing.
We've had the discussion already about how you can report on what they claimed and then present a fact without saying what is it. But a really good example during COVID was hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
TechCrunch wrote an article saying that France had positive results testing hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID. Donald Trump was briefed on this reporting, appears at a press conference and said, "Did you hear about this? They got in France hydroxychloroquine." Immediately, these same outlets said Trump pushes fish cleaner. Now, I'm not going to play any games. Those were intentional lies. There's no way that these same outlets that 3 days prior said France sees positive results, as soon as Trump said it, immediately forgot.
Yeah. Well,
so if you're going to report on the story, the reporting would be, name whatever outlet. For litigation purpose, I'll just say outlet, and we'll not name it. Outlet espouses efficacy in study, immediately counters own news reporting after Trump says so.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that happen, right? Where like once the tribe saying the thing switches or whatever.
Well, the mask thing was funny too.
What's that?
The mask thing. Conservatives at first were pro-mask.
Pro-mask, yes. Yeah.
And then when the left became pro-mask, they became anti-mask.
Well, that's funny. I don't know if it was because conservatives, there was a lot going on there. I don't know if that was because conservatives were reacting to the left so much as they were starting to be like, well, is this as bad as everyone's saying, right?
I had people mailing me masks in January and February of 2020. We were getting boxes of masks sent to my P.O. box.
Really?
Because they were like, Tim.
Be safe.
Well, because the establishment was claiming it was no big deal.
Right.
YouTube was demonetizing us for talking about it. We were explicitly barred from talking about COVID in January. And I did anyway. I'm like, I'll just lose the money, I guess. I mean, it's weird.
Yeah.
And a lot of right-wingers were mailing various N95s and stuff saying you need to get ready. Mm-hmm. Then Trump locks things down. Fauci says you don't need a mask. A few months later says you need a mask. All of a sudden conservatives are like, don't wear masks.
I mean,
Which is
you're right. The early days, it was like switched from how it ended up turning out for the majority of the rest of COVID. But I don't know. Like, I mean, that could be due to tribal loyalties, or it could be and reactions to the other tribe. But in that case, I got the sense that conservatives were starting to be like, they were already distrustful of the major institutions. So once the major institutions started saying we need to lock down, we need a mask, they were like,
wait a minute.
And then also the media. I thought it was really interesting that the media, they always had like the death counter up, and it really reminded me of the post 9/11 times where they had the terror alert threats.
Yep.
Do you remember that? Where I just thought that it was like such an interesting example of the and people were terrified during that time. And again, like you could talk about whether or not it's like justified or not, but like the fact of the matter is that the way that the media is treating these topics is just going to elevate, public anxiety or not, depending on how they're treating it.
I think that was intentional.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
well, so back to the point I was making before about you mentioned these liberal journalists, or these journalists are like, Trump is such a threat, we have to make sure everybody knows it. We've had these conversations over and over and over again over the past several years with various individuals, and I would say early on in my career I was very principle oriented. That is, there is a mathematical basis to the morality and the logic that we exist within. And then I would say I learned largely from conservatives being not adhering to their own principles. I realized that there is no such thing. It's not a thing. And I'll explain. The example I like to give is that I always ask people, and I'm not going to ask you this, but I'll just tell the question. Do you believe parents should have the final say in the medical treatment for their children? Depending on the context, you will get a different, you'll get yes or no from either left or right. So the examples that I will use is the conservatives will go, of course they should. Of course the parents should have final say. I say, oh, okay. So when the parents bring their kid in for a sex change and the doctor says stop, the parents should have final say and be allowed to get the kid. No, absolutely not. Should the state intervene and stop the parents? Yes, they should. Okay. Now what happens when the parents don't want to get a vaccine and the doctor is mandating it? Should the state be able to intervene and say, you have, no, wait, hold. The left and the right will flip the principle, because the principle of parental choice is not the issue. The morality and the worldview is. So to that point, when these journalists said Trump is a fascist and he must be stopped by any means, well, they're wrong. They're morally wrong. They are morally bad, and they are attempting to manipulate people for the purpose of stopping someone they don't like, which is different from if I am saying that these media outlets are bad and they are wrong, and I am going to expose them and explain my views, that is morally good. My intention is to better inform you by explaining what I see them doing, what they've done in the past, and what they think they're currently going to do. What we tend to see from these outlets is, on COVID and Trump, to create fake stories, to omit information, change the context, and trick you because they believe the ends justify the means. So while there is principally something similar in a bias on the left and the right, where I'm going to present my view to you so that you come to a similar conclusion, on the right, at least in tendency, sometimes, I would say sometimes there are bad people trying to grift, and we call these people out when we can. On the left, it's the majority, it's the institutions, it's the machine, it's the outlets themselves.
Well, I think the difference is transparency. Like you were just very transparent about like what you're doing, right? And again, another reason that we exist is because we want to make these, sort of manipulative tactics transparent, and not everybody's transparent about what they're doing. Like they're like, we're just providing news, but they're actually twisting and tilting it so that you come to a certain conclusion. But you're here saying like, well, I'm going to call out the good and the bad, and that's what I'm doing. And so that, like, we don't have any problem with people like being transparent about what they're doing with their media.
Well, this is not on you guys. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I like, again, I say it a million times because I know I'm kind of like creating this air where it's like, what is the purpose of bias ratings? But I do think it's extremely valuable what you do. Yeah. My point is just, I do not believe that it is factually incorrect to say that there is a tendency towards moral good on the right and moral bad on the left. But I'll qualify that because obviously people have subjective morality. The idea that someone would lie and convince you of something that is false for the purpose of you granting them power or submitting, I believe is wrong. Mm-hmm. I think we see a lot from the left. They don't think it's wrong. They think that the ends justify the means because the people can't understand.
Do you think that, like, they know they're lying, though? Like,
absolutely. So there's gradients to it. I mean,
Well,
look, when I sat down with the president at Fusion, and he told me explicitly we would not cover stories if they were offensive, even if it was factually true. Yeah, they know what they're doing. And so you find on the right, they like to refer to MAGA as a cult. Trump has a cult. Trump has people that no matter what he says, no war, Trump gets elected, he goes to war. No, we have to support Trump. The war, we okay, guys. Like, I get it. However, the right in this country is a disparate collection of various political ideologies ranging from classical liberal, libertarian, even right anarchists, laissez-faire capitalists, conservatives, traditional conservatives, national conservatives. It's wide ranging. And it does include some more I would describe as less palatable white nationalists, racists, and otherwise, so they make up a small portion. This is why the libertarians break from Trump. They voted for him 24, but now they're mad at him because of the war.
Right.
The left seems to be much tighter. And I would say this from just my own personal research, but there's actually data, I think it was like 2020, which you may have seen. It was the economic versus social axis, where it showed that the Democrats are hyper-clustered. The Democratic voters are in one really tight-packed economic and social cluster, and the right was spread out completely between economics and social. I'm sorry, economics. The right was very traditional on social issues, but spread out on economic issues. And the Democratic voter base, the left, was hyper-concentrated in one quadrant of left economics and left social issues. So when we're describing what the right is doing, I'll give you an example. When George Floyd died, every conservative came out saying, I can't believe this happened. This cop is bad. As time went on and we got more details from the case, we saw the body camera footage, everybody went, wow, actually, Chauvin did not do anything wrong. I would say anything criminal. We don't like what happened, but he certainly is being overcharged. The left doesn't change their views. Their attitude is, it doesn't matter what's true. It matters. Actually, what did AOC say? That I don't remember the exact quote, but she said something like, it's more important to be morally correct than factually correct or something.
Yep.
So I think that the issue is, to the layman looking at a bias chart, there's a few things they're going to presume from a left or right bias, either what your political views are, which certainly doesn't align with left or right, or what your moral worldview or tribe may be. But I would actually argue that it's whether you're lying or not. That I often describe it as the right wing just means based in reality, more likely to be correct, and left wing means ideologically motivated or manipulative.
But the left says the exact same thing about
because
the right.
they're lying.
Yeah.
Because when AOC says it's better to be morally correct than factually correct, we know what they're doing. When they claim Trump called Nazis fine people, when they edited that video of Trump throwing the food into the koi pond to manipulate the audience, when they claim I stole a cat, when the AG himself lied and claimed that I got money from Russia. They just lie all the time. Don't get me wrong, Trump lies too, but the right is disparate. So you have some elements of the right that are culty and lie, but for the most part, you have various factions that are just going to be putting out what is or what may be, even sometimes getting it wrong. The left is unabashed in saying things like censor and silence people, destroy their companies. The list of COVID lies, someone put together a list of, from the corporate and establishment, legacy or otherwise media, all of the stories they got wrong. And there's like 500 major stories that were fabricated.
During COVID?
No, just in the past 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Like the easiest example is the Very Fine People hoax.
Yeah.
That to this day, last year we had a liberal journalist on the show. And when the issue came up, she was like, wait, Trump called them fine people. And we all looked at each other on the show. And we're not all conservatives, right? We got anarchist on the show, Luke. We've got hippy dippy Ian. We're all like, after 10 years, you don't know this. Well,
that's what I'm saying. It's like, do they know what they're doing? That's what I'm saying. It's like these things I think these things often get repeated, and I almost wonder sometimes if it's just laziness, like not looking into the actual reality and maybe both sides even do this, but like if I hear something that like suits my agenda and my worldview, then I just like accept it and repeat it.
Unfortunately, it would be biased for me to say they are either ignorant or malicious. I can only tell you that they said a thing.
That's what yeah.
And this is the challenge, ultimately, with the left-right bias for the 800th time. When we know they're lying all the time, sometimes they're wrong, it is biased of us to point out that they're either lying or wrong.
I mean, it's only biased in the sense of you're interpreting it. Like it again, like we do fact checking. You know, it's not part of our bias chart or our bias ratings, but we write about this stuff. You know, and so we're not biased when we point out facts, I would say.
Right, but it's the question of they're either wrong or lying.
It's once you're adding,
But those are absolutes.
Yeah, the layer of
right. If someone says the sky is pink,
yeah,
they're either wrong or they're lying.
I think a lot of what this all comes down to is like the role that you're playing, right? Because we traditionally expect journalists to play a specific role in society where they are supposed to be, you know, giving us, and again, I don't think people really believe they're doing this anymore because they're not, but like they are supposed to be the ones that are like acting as like intermediaries between like the authorities and the people and getting information and sharing information, also like reporting stories about like what's really going on places so that people can decide how to vote, you know, how to buy, how to act, all of that, right? But that's not what's going on anymore. And I mean, so once you get into the territory of, well, she's ignorant or she's lying, like you're playing a different role once you start adding commentary, interpretation, and it's fine to play that role.
But those are
and it's important.
I would argue it is binary. It is a fact. A person who presents incorrect information is either wrong or lying.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So
I guess I'm just saying that as far as like being a journalist, like to insert that, like it's just
so here's the challenge.
Out of bounds of what the role is meant to be doing, which is
why I think journalism is largely dead. Because when you have for 10 years people watching lie after lie after lie after lie just over and over again, and the expectation is just to keep repeating their lies, people are going to abandon your... If I, as a journalist, only ever just repeated the lie, people would be like, I'm not watching you anymore. Because we know it's a lie and we're tired of it.
That's what we're saying. Yeah, the trust is pretty much gone because of how these things are handled. And they're sensitive issues and are also like just not giving a voice. Like the COVID back to the COVID thing, like I just found that in a lot of the press, like there were all these dissident voices who were like unhappy with lockdowns or their business was being affected or like whatever it was, or there were like other views about different treatments, whatever, but like it wasn't being covered, you know? So like I think also people get tired of like not having their voice actually like represented in the conversation from these institutions, which are supposed to be representing the conversations that are going on amongst Americans and the policy debates and all of that, right? They're not.
People are getting sick. People are dying. The vaccine was causing myocarditis and pericarditis, and they intentionally suppressed this information in the media, and they knew it. And I wonder how much of it was fueled by their sponsors, which were these big pharmaceutical companies.
Well, and also when the riots were going on, right? I was seeing, you know, it was another thing where like we could say it's algorithmic bias, where I was just seeing a lot of this. But it was basically a lot of videos of, you know, buildings burning down and like cop cars being set on fire and like tons of destruction, right? But I would go to news sites and I wasn't seeing that covered, and cities were burning, right? And it was really like citizen journalists on the ground, like getting footage of this stuff. But it wasn't making its way into the news in the way that you would think it was when, like, you know, millions of dollars of damage is happening to a city. And there was also, you know, the New York Times, I believe that there was a reporter that was covering the damage in Kenosha. And they wrote a piece about it and the damage to the small businesses after the riots and things like that. And the New York Times was like, well, we can't run this until after the election, right? Wow. So like...
the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Yeah, so stuff like that, like these decisions are being made in ways that will like the people that are supposed to be providing information as like a public service, it's not that. It's their tribe, it's their financial interests, like...
So I'll I guess my final thoughts. I'll just give you what I'm just thinking about myself. That's what I do, right, guys? It's always just about me. I'm kidding, half kidding. So anyway, when I was working for Vice, I go to Brazil. I'm not here to choose sides on the protest, just film and interview people. Live stream. Go to Turkey, the same thing, not for or against. And go to Thailand, all of these stories. I went to Ukraine, not for or against, just here to see what's going on. Here's what I saw, guys. You figure it out.
Yeah.
And then... you know what ends up happening is I was called right-wing for that. I was called a white supremacist for that. Objective journalism does not exist. It is a tool of white supremacy. So this idea that I would go there and not take sides was to allow the oppressors to succeed.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening, a really great example, in 20, this would have been in 2020, I think in September, I said, if Trump loses this, people are going to lose their minds. Like, they're going to go to the White House in November. They're going to storm the building. They're not going to let the left win based on the stuff that I've been seeing. That is me giving you my personal analysis based on the reporting that I had done and what it concludes in. I was called a lunatic. Many liberals started saying Tim Pool's a nut job for thinking this is going to happen. After January 6th happened, they said I had foreknowledge, and the fact that I had predicted it earlier proves it. So November comes and goes. Nobody storms the White House, and they said, look at this nut job. He lives in, Wally World. January 6th happens, and they go, what did Tim Pool know? How did he predict this? So what ends up happening is I have a video from, I think it was like, or maybe even January 2nd or 3rd or something, where I was reading a Fox News article that said Donald Trump calls for supporters to come to D.C. to protest. And I went, whoa. I was like, that's going to get crazy. Jamie Raskin ran that in Congress saying, here's people advocating for January 6th, the riots. Here's me literally just saying, here's a thing Trump has done. And these people in the corporate press claimed I was advocating for it. They called me far right. Democrats went on TV and lied about me. Where we are today is the AG in 2024 lied to the American people, claiming that Russians were funding me, Benny, Dave Rubin, etc., fabricated whole cloth, and drops the case. There's no evidence these people even exist. They manipulated quotes to create a fake indictment. And then here's the challenge. The journalist, the good, unbiased journalist, should just report what the indictment says, even though it's fake. And if I say it's fake and they lied, well, clearly I'm biased.
No, I mean, the journalist should report the indictment and what you say. Like, that's the thing. Like, it should be, it should include perspectives on what they're reporting on, right? So that if something that someone's claiming is a fact is contested, you get all of those voices in there.
This is the challenge. For how I end up in this position as biased or lean right or whatever is simply because I'm calling them out for what they've been doing for 10 years. And I understand to be neutral would be to say, maybe they're right that I was advocating for.
No, I don't think that would be neutral.
Neutral would be, Jamie Raskin said that I was advocating for January 6th riots.
Yeah, that's just a statement of fact of what he said.
Except
without
he's lying.
any layered commentary. Well,
and by saying
it's
he's
a
lying,
fact that he said it. What he said is.
It is a fact that he lied.
Well,
it is. I never advocated for anybody to go to January 6th and riot, but he claimed I did.
Yeah.
So when I say he lied.
Well, again, it's like he interpreted your words. He might have interpreted your words as being advocacy, right? And so again, like
if that's the job of a journalist,
people go back to the original clip and they look at what you said, they might be like, I'm not hearing Tim advocate. Right?
But they're not going to.
Yeah.
At a congressional hearing, he played a video where I read a headline. I went, whoa, Trump says people should come down. And the whole thing was me being like, I'm not going to go. That's going to be crazy. You know? And so we had originally been planning to get a hotel room and do a show from a hotel room. And then we decided not to because we were like, this is a bad idea. Jamie Raskin lied. It is a fact that he lied. It is not my opinion that he lied. He did lie.
It's another example of like a breakdown of neutral journalism to be like if somebody was going to report on what you said, they should quote you directly and in full, right? And not be like Tim Pool advocated, right? Because that's an interpretation.
It is not honest or factual reporting to say Jamie Raskin today says Tim Pool advocated for riots at January 6th, playing a clip in which Pool said, quote, you can then ask me for a quote, but and then this is the problem, right? On the Tim Pool steals a cat story.
Yeah.
He got a quote from someone claiming I stole a cat. It's fake story.
Yeah.
It's not journalism.
Yeah.
A good journalist would never run that story.
Yeah, you have to dig into the like primary sources. You have to like find you have to find where the information is that you can actually use. And even to say that you were advocating for rioting or whatever, again, I would be like, if I read that in the news, I would be like, well, what did he say? Let me go back and let me watch the clip. And a good journalist would just provide the clip and not interpret it for the reader.
Well, the problem
That's
is
what we don't see
the single
anymore.
clip doesn't provide any context at all. It's a 20-minute long video.
Yeah.
And no one's going to share that. No one's going to watch it.
Yeah.
My audience watches it, so they know
Yeah.
I never did. The people who are Democrats and watch Jamie Raskin believe what he's saying is
Yeah.
true. And so
He's an authority to them, right? They trust him, right? They don't
exactly.
trust you. Yeah.
But it's a fact that he lied. And it's not just an error. It's an overt lie because nothing in the clip that was provided advocated at all. So that means that he's playing a clip and saying a thing that is untrue, knowing either he did not actually listen to what I said or having listened to what I said, knowing that I did not advocate for this. Either way, it's one of two lies.
Well, do you think it is the case that he genuinely interpreted your words as advocacy? No?
Absolutely not.
Because I see this with Trump
I said,
a lot.
don't go.
Yeah. Well, I see this with Trump a lot where like reporters will, report on what he said, but they've like interpreted it a different way than I might, right? And they don't even, but the thing is they don't even know they're providing an interpretation. Like, it's like what's passed off as hard news is often actually interpretive. And it's like, that's the line people don't understand is the difference between the objective and the subjective.
If it is, I could probably talk to you for 27 years on all this stuff. This is great.
Yeah.
If it is discernibly, factually, mathematically true that a person lied, the journalist should report he lied, right?
Again, like
if the guy said, I admit that I lied, here's a video of me fabricating the lie with friends, and I lied. They should write, politician admits to lying, he lied.
I mean, I think I would still quote him directly, like politician, I lied, right? Like quote him directly, right? Because again, once you get into this territory of like the journalist is saying who's telling the truth and who's lying, it's really hairy territory.
But you understand the challenge is like, if an apple falls off a tree and I report an apple fell off a tree, it's a fact statement of the thing that happened.
Yeah.
If a politician walks out, looks at the apple after you watch it fall off the tree and says the apple doesn't exist, you'd be like, and he lied.
No, here's the challenge: is they say the apple careened off the tree.
No, but my point is,
yeah,
if an apple falls from a tree as an object with no personal involvement, and you report that the apple fell, it's a fact statement.
Yeah.
A human taking an action is also a fact statement, but when it gets into the potential for politics, the argument all of a sudden is that we should not tell the truth. We should be neutral. And so an apple falls from a tree, you can say, there was an apple on a tree, I looked at it, and then the apple was on the ground, I don't know how. Right? That's silly.
Yeah.
So again, if a politician walks outside and kicks a dog, you would report the politician kicked a dog.
If I observed it or there was video of it.
Right. So there was a politician, what's the guy's name? Jay, what's his face? Do you guys remember? Jay, whatever, the guy in Virginia. He tried kicking a dog.
Okay.
Here's a video of him trying to kick a dog.
Is there a video?
There's a video of it. And Jay Jones. And we were all like, why did he just do that?
Yeah.
He didn't try to field goal it, but he raises his foot and swings his foot at it and the dog jumps out of the way. And we were like, what?
Ew. Okay.
Should we report Jay Jones tries to kick dog?
Yeah. Well,
that's biased because they said he was just trying to shoo the dog away.
Well, yeah. So again, this is another thing. We've had to use the term appears to because this is what we run into, right? Where if there's a video of something and we're like reasonable people watching the video and we're like, we sometimes have to say appears to.
No.
There was actually
he appears to try to shoo the dog away. You're biased and don't like him, so you said it looked like he was kicking him.
But then we've also struggled with when it's appropriate to say appears to and when it's appropriate to just be like, this is what we're seeing.
Exactly.
Right? It's not easy. When Charlie Kirk was shot, we saw the video. We were like, he's shot. But then there were people. Do you remember this? In the very early hours, there were people being like, "Was he shot? I don't know. It might have been glass."
The first thing we heard was that someone stood up from the ground and fired up at him with a handgun.
Yeah. So people were like, so you don't have authorities confirming it yet, but there's video. So as a reporter, you have to say what you're seeing, right? And so we were like, well, and I was pretty confident he'd been shot, but other people were like, well, it could have been. There was like stuff where the people were saying that like glass had blown off of something. Yep. So we were like, are we going to get in trouble if we say Charlie Kirk is shot? So we said early on, I believe we said appears to have been shot. And then so we have to, anyway, make these distinctions. But for the apple falling from the tree example, I think this is where it gets hairy, right? An apple fell from a tree, right? Or if you say the apple
witnesses claimed an apple fell from the tree.
violently careened off the tree, right? Then you're getting into interpretive territory where you're saying like you're coloring it with your view, right?
My point largely is in matters of anything pertaining to a human being, you now have to omit key details for the purpose of being a journalist. Like, again, if I watch a guy try to kick a dog and he tried to kick a dog, you're going to get this huge argument because people want to defend the guy. They want him to win. There's politics involved.
They're going to interpret it differently.
Whereas if it was just a tree branch falling down and a dog jumping out of the way, you'd say a tree branch fell. People are going to be like, I don't care.
Yeah, but the way I saw this during BLM riots too. Like, so the way that you handle that as a journalist is that you describe what's happening in the video, right? You can get around it by just describing like he lifts his leg, like you know what I mean? Like, and it can get a little wordy because you're having to like actually describe what happened. But I remember seeing a lot of, coverage of riots and things like that. And what would often be omitted in the reporting is like descriptions of what was actually like fireworks were thrown or were set off near a building, or like details about like what was actually being observed, right? Because if you omit those details, then it gives a different view. But you have to be able to do that without coloring it or like interpreting it in ways that aren't fair. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess just my final thoughts in that capacity, and then we've gone well, so I've got one more thing to say, but it's. When it comes to a politician overtly lying, we're very careful to accuse them of lying, even if they did and we know they did. Like when I'm forgetting the guy's name. Who was the guy who pushed the fire, that took the fire thing off the door and then pulled the fire alarm? Bowman. Jamal Bowman, is that his name? Yeah, I think it's Jamal Bowman. So he's on video taking down the sign and then pulling the fire alarm, and then he lied about it later on. It is a fact that he lied, but it's biased. We can't say that. We can only say he appears to pull the fire alarm and then claimed, it was an accident. Like, oh, come on.
But that
let's
like,
be reasonable.
I mean, I get it, but like, again, like that is how you have to present it.
So
to avoid those accusations of bias. It's okay if you want to be biased, it's fine. We're also like not anti-bias. We're like, you can be a biased journalist. Like that's
final.
fine.
Final. Is AllSides a nonprofit or a for-profit?
We're a for-profit.
So and is it? I'm not trying to. I'm just curious. Like, it's subscription model based. Are there like, is it solicitation leads?
We have sustaining members that can pay us annually or monthly to support us, and then we make a little bit off of ad revenue, but barely. And if you're a member, you don't see ads. And then we do provide some services to like schools, media outlets. If media outlets want to be audited, we do that. There are still media outlets that care about like not appearing biased. Yeah.
Is it single member owned? Is there investors?
We actually launched a WeFunder, so we have like the
cool.
public can.
So like what are they called? Safe agreement?
Yeah, we don't have I don't think we have an
investment.
open round right now, but yeah, it's like equity crowdfunding, right?
So. But is there a single principal officer, or do you have multiple equity holders? Like, was it founded by one person who controls everything?
We have co-founders, yeah. So there's.
Is it public
multiple.
how many there are?
I don't know in totality. We have two listed on our site.
Like two main bosses, maybe. Mm-hmm. Are they left, right, or center?
Center and right. Yeah.
I would make the argument.
And then we have a lefty, a woman who she's out of Berkeley, and she co-founded our schools program. We do have like a nonprofit arm, AllSides Education, that's schools related.
I would argue that if AllSides had been founded by a liberal, you would not have been hired. They would have right-wing people, and the right-wing people would be like how The View has right-wing people. They are conservatives, but it just so happens the left is correct. And I think that the ecosystem that you guys have can only exist in a center-to-center right environment. The ultra-right individuals who want to win a culture war are going to be a little bit more charitable than the ultra-left, but still substantially less than the moderates. I think that moderate liberals are not liars, but they are lied to. Centrist types, moderate, middle-of-the-road people, and lean right individuals are the most likely to be correct. There's some data that we've shown on the show quite a bit. Maybe you guys have seen it, that liberals get about 95% of their news from liberal sources. Independents get 60%, 66 from left, 33 from right. And the right gets 33 from left and 66 from right. So even among conservatives, they still consume a portion of liberal news, but liberals only consume liberal news.
Yeah.
This is why I would make that argument that phenomenon would be the case. And the reason I asked about the leadership structure was to first determine whether or not I was likely wrong. And then upon hearing that I may be right, I think it wouldn't be the case if liberals owned it. That's not an absolute, but
Yeah, we have a center and the co-founders of AllSides are center and lean right, and then we have she founded she's out of Berkeley, and her name is Joan Blades, and she co-founded our school's arm, so she's on the left. So the founding team is left, center, right. And our team is like explicitly multi-partisan. If you like go to our team page, you can see that we display the rating of everybody on the team.
So when you say she's out of Berkeley, though,
Yeah.
how can I ask how old she is, or is that inappropriate?
I think it's appropriate. She founded was it Moms Rising? Or sorry, Move On.
Really?
Early or Joan Blades.
Yeah, but see, I was a fan of Move On back in the day.
Yeah.
And my political worldview hasn't changed that much.
Yeah.
Like only on guns for the most part. And that's a constitutional question. But my policy views still align with 2010 Democrats.
Yeah, things have
I supported
changed.
Democrats' maximum donations to 3 or 4 candidates in 2020.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the main like parts of our mission is just that we like our founder John Gable did a TED talk with Joan Blades, and they're left and right, and they go through their different backgrounds. He's from Kentucky Coal Country, she's from Berkeley. Like they're very different views, but they're friends. And so like one of our main things is just like civil discourse and being curious about the other side. And I know I heard you say earlier you think that's like a center right idea, but our website, I'm not sure, because our website, our readers are 33% left, 33% center, 33% right. And there's times when it changes a little bit, but
Yeah, how many DSA? How many progressive?
Oh, good question. We don't ask on that granular level, and we definitely should.
Because when people ask me, like, how do I describe myself politically, I say center left liberal probably.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go watch the show and you're like, but you voted for Trump. And I'll be like, oh yeah, and I think he's wrong about a lot of things. But how am I supposed to vote for the transgender, the kids, open borders party, right? I had a conversation with Steven Crowder years ago where I said, I'm pro-choice. And he said, okay, let's talk. Do you think abortion should be allowed past 16 weeks? And I was like, no, of course not. He goes, okay, you're pro-life now. Like, that's a right-wing position these days. And I'll be like, what? No, of course not. Like,
Oh, yeah.
pro-choice, wrong. Colorado has abortion to the point of birth. Virginia tried passing it. Blue states across the country are getting abortion, late-term abortion legalized. And if I'm just like, well, I think, at a certain point, you can't just kill the baby. Like, that's right when you're
Well,
pro-life.
I don't know. Like we have a section of our website called Similarity Hub where we try to highlight places where there's actually agreement. Like I think a lot of people think that Americans are more polarized on certain issues than they actually are, and abortion's actually a good example, because a lot of Americans have your view. We're like, there's a cutoff, right? But they're not saying never, and they're not saying, and they're not saying always. So we try to highlight those points, those areas of agreement, because they exist. And so I don't know if Crowder was the one saying, well, you're a conservative now. I don't know that I.
Well, we bring progressives on the show. They tell me I'm pro-life. They tell me I'm a conservative. Because it's a woman's choice at any point, and we have no say. In fact, one progressive argued that the woman should be able to terminate the baby after it's born if she wants, because the baby isn't conscious or forming memories for 3 months anyway. So when Colorado passes a law saying you can have abortion up to 9 months to the point of birth, and they did, it's legal and cleared. I'm not saying it happens 1 million times a day or whatever. I think the estimates are like 600 times a year. I say, okay, that's crazy. I don't want that. That's the right-wing position now.
Yeah, it's just like as times change, the perception of where a view falls changes. But then there are some things like that don't really change. There are still lines, right? Like they're like the Democratic Socialists, like they want like collectively owned. What's that?
Abolish the Senate.
Yeah, abolish the Electoral College, like things like that you're just never going to hear the right agree with, or well, I guess never say never, but like there's not bleed over there. So like there are still lines where like, yeah, generally that's a view on the left, and generally that's a view on the right, and then there's
the woman, the liberal woman at AllSides agree with abolishing the Senate and open borders and abolishing the electoral college.
I don't know her views on specific issues. She's very she's very in favor though of like civil discourse and like talking to people you disagree with and understanding their views.
I'm sorry, she's right wing. But I'm not even being cute. I'm not even being derogatory or making a point. The politics flows in one direction. When I interviewed a white nationalist, they said that Tim Pool is right wing for having done it because no liberal would platform a right wing person.
Well, I mean, this was happening to Joe Rogan, right? Where he was like interviewing people with different perspectives and he was like genuinely inviting people on from all across the political spectrum. But then people were saying he was right wing just because he was willing to interview. And I was like, there was a time when I was like, he's actually doing journalism. Like he's actually doing journalism, and people like don't even know how to recognize journalism anymore because when you interview people, because we've dealt with this in some of our reviews where like if a media outlet is reporting on issues that the right cares about, people are like, well, they're a right wing side, they're leaning right, and it's like, well, what if they're balancing it with things the left cares about? That's journalism.
Yeah, you have 3 right wing founders. I'm sorry, you have 3 right, but I'll explain why. Do you know about the paradox of tolerance?
No, I don't.
From what's his name? Karl Popper, I think it might be.
I don't know.
Big meme on the left these days. Now, by all means, you can mention that this very nice woman. She sounds fantastic. I'm not trying to be mean.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you guys do. It sounds like she's an old school liberal.
Oh yeah.
No, so am I.
I think that'd be.
But I'm right wing now. Mm-hmm. So the Karl Popper paradox of tolerance is that you cannot have civil discourse with the intolerant because they will eventually eliminate your speech from the discourse. So the modern left position among millennials and younger on the left is do not platform the right.
Yeah.
So it's very funny. There's a very prominent liberal leaning organization that hosts debate, who I won't name, struggle to get people on the left. There are debate series that put on by liberals struggle to get people on the left. My show, for instance, we've offered money to people on the left because they will not come on the show. And when I say left, I'm talking about ranging from prominent politicians. We don't offer that money, but high-profile liberal personalities with large followings and podcasts will not do it. They won't do it. Civil discourse is a right-wing position.
Well,
and just real quick.
Yeah.
Jimmy Dore is a socialist, but he's right-wing. I hold liberal, moderate, I would actually say most of my politics slightly lean a little bit in the old school liberal camp, but I'm conservative on a lot of things too. I'm right-wing. Lincoln Project, clearly conservative on a ton of issues. Opposed gay marriage forever, these guys. Left-wing. So what defines you as left and right these days is just your tribal alignment. So I would argue that, but we've the reason why I stopped you, sorry, is that we've gone so far over. I've been having a blast. It's been great talking. Yeah. Do you want to just add anything or shout anything out? Just
no, I mean, just, check out AllSides, and honestly, people should sign up to help us rate bias because like we want to collect a lot of different perspectives. So
now what's going to happen is you're going to get a bunch of right-leaning people, and they're going to go on.
We account for that. We asked them in the survey. We're like, "Are you left or right?"
Well, this is a challenge too,
and we normalize the data.
See, this is why this conversation is going to be 20 years. Carl Benjamin, do you know who he is?
Yeah,
Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah.
He in like 2017 or 18 did a political compass test, and he was center-left libertarian, like civil. He was like, I'm a classical liberal.
Yeah.
His audience did as well. My audience did. We all did this, and we found that all of these people, these Gamergate type people, were basically like young liberal, lefty libertarian types.
Yeah.
They were told you are conservative and right wing. And they went, okay. So now when asked, they go, I'm a conservative and I'm pro-choice and think we should have a progressive tax. And I think that immigration is, you're like, wait a minute. So a lot of these people did change and adopted post-liberal or conservative views. But a lot of these people are liberals and think they're conservative because they're told they're conservative. Then when you ask them, they're going to say, I'm a conservative, but they're actually liberals, which I guess would actually result in everything skewing super far left.
I was just going to say that. Like, it's if things are pulling farther left, then you're like, well, I guess I'm here. I didn't move, but they moved. So now I'm on the right, Yeah. So that, and that's been, that's
But
been
anyway, finish your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't even remember what I was going to say.
You were shouting things out. You said people should sign up and
yeah. No, people should sign up, help us rate bias. And also like this is like our project is a two-way street. We want to hear from people. If they think a rating is wrong, if there are better ways we could be doing this. We want to be a tool that helps people sort through all this noise, all this like chaos and nuance and confusion and manipulation. So, we want to hear from people. We want people to help us with our ratings. And if there are ways we can add more nuance to our ratings, we're always talking about that internally, and that's something we want to do, like exactly what you just described.
What about new metrics?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Like, okay, should we add a pro and anti-establishment metric? You know, should we add, or should we even just like break it down? Like, where are they on Israel? Where are they on? Like, how do we like?
That'd be cool. Actually, you can show like
tags of
even 100 different quadrants.
Yeah.
Like if you really get into the minutia of it.
But I'll say, like, we're real people, like
Quotient.
looking at all of this and rating these. So, and we're a small team, and so we want to grow, we want to do more, and a lot of
Where
it's
are you guys based out of?
We're remote, like yeah. So we're all over the country intentionally, because then you've got
You guys should do debates.
Oh, well, yeah.
The AllSides debate series would be so cool.
We are hosting roundtables where we're inviting people to come and like talk issues through kind of like in a guided way, but it's not, we're explicit that it's not a debate.
Yeah, no, I agree. Conversations are better than debates.
Yeah, exactly.
What I would love to see is these online debate bros, left or right. No, none of that. Just, academic liberal, academic conservative conversation.
We think people should just be in conversation, asking questions, sharing their views, not even necessarily trying to convert each other. Like, there's nothing in our agenda that's about converting anybody. It's just about growing and understanding. We think that's how we can like actually solve problems, and just not be manipulating and fighting or violent towards each other. Like, all of that is when you don't actually understand where someone's coming from. So,
right on.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thanks for hanging out. This has been a lot of fun.
It has been.
Still a lot more to talk about, but I think we got through a lot.
Covered
it was great.
a lot. Yeah.
Well, thanks for hanging out. Do you have like a social media people could follow you on?
Yeah, AllSides is AllSides now on most platforms, and then allsides.com.
Cool. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. This has been so much fun. You can follow me, of course, on X and Instagram at Timcast. Subscribe to my channels everywhere. Timcast IRL, you know it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't, and we'll see y'all next time.